Chapter 978. This was also the reason why one of the surviving demonic beast commanders, Musumafu, was in such a miserable state. If it weren't for the fact that there were too many demonic beasts, which helped Musumafu block a portion of the attack, Wuming's attack could have easily killed Musumafu. Silently shaking his head, Kingu wanted to give up on these demonic beasts. Anyway, his mother and the new humans were not harmed. As long as his mother came out, this world would be over. No one could stop his mother. Even that man, in Kingu's opinion, could not stop his mother from destroying Mesopotamia and cleansing the human race. After thinking about this, Kingu focused his eyes and looked in Wuming's direction. His mother was a great enemy, so he had to pay attention to her movements. Moreover, he was so far away, so he shouldn't be affected. With Enkidu's powerful eyesight, Kingu easily saw Wuming in the distance, who was holding a broken lightsaber. Ugh! This made Kingu feel a headache again, and he couldn't help but groan. This made Kingu shocked. He was shocked because he still couldn't get used to facing that man, and the situation seemed to be getting worse. At this moment, Gorgon had run underground. This was really bad. In the distance, Wuming removed Meteor Silver's noble phantasm liberation and gathered the broken lightsaber in his right hand, turning the broken lightsaber back into a bright silver knight sword. After Wuming killed Ba Xiaomu and used the divine blade of salvation to clean up the poison in the surroundings, he must have rushed over from the north wall without stopping. However, because Wuming had already sensed Fan Baba's aura at the north wall, he was not in a hurry. Therefore, Wuming hid himself and went around to the inconspicuous edge of the north wall, ready to act according to the situation. After all, no matter when, the enemy is in the open while I'm in the dark, was quite advantageous. Coincidentally, Gorgon made the demonic beasts ignore Fan Baba and attack the vine barrier instead. This gave Wuming an opportunity. When the demonic beasts rushed up to attack the vine barrier, Wuming directly took out the meteor silver that had accompanied him for a long time and directly released its evil noble phantasm, successfully killing most of the demonic beasts. The reason why Wuming did not use the divine blade of salvation was entirely because in the current situation, meteor silver was more useful than the divine blade of salvation, and also because it had been a long time since Wuming had meteor silver. Although it was a noble phantasm's noble phantasm, it was a noble phantasm had accompanied Wuming was a noble phantasm of salvation. Wuming opened the dragon lair and put away the meteor silver. Then, he raised himself up and took in the entire north wall. After being affected by Gorgon's attack and being blasted down by Wuming's light cannon, the demons attacking the northern wall were almost completely wiped out. At most, there was only a sixth of their original numbers left, and a half-crippled demonic commander. However, even if there were only these demonic beasts left, the number of demonic beasts was still considerable, at least to the humans. However, Wuming had already helped them a lot, and it was impossible for him to continue helping them. After all, if the humans were to completely rely on God, Gilgamesh's will of separation between man and God would probably die directly. Therefore, the remaining demonic beasts could only be eliminated by the humans themselves. In addition, Wuming had a more important point. Wuming saw the fake Enkidu that seemed to be Kingu. Wuming had a feeling that the other party must be an extraordinary existence in this singularity. Perhaps the other party was hiding some secrets that Wuming did not know about, such as Tiamat. Wuming immediately flew towards Enkidu. When Enkidu noticed Wuming coming over, he immediately dived into the bottomless abyss that was opened up by Gorgon. Wuming stopped above the bottomless abyss, then glanced at Leonidas and Musasobo Benkei who were protected by vines. After nodding to the two of them, Wuming did not hesitate and dived into the abyss. "Let's go, Mr. Bianqing. This place will be broken soon. We should retreat." The vine barrier was consumed by the previous magical beasts. It was estimated that it would not last long. If they continued to stay, then they would be swallowed up by the remaining magical beasts. As they understood before, even if the number of magical beasts was consumed, the number of magical beasts would still pose a threat to humans. However, they could rely on the north wall to deal with the current number of beasts. Silent understood this point. That's why he gave Leonidas the task of dealing with the beasts outside the north wall. That's why he nodded to Leonidas earlier. Leonidas and Musasobo Benkei saw that sporadic magical beasts had entered through the gap in the vine barrier. They immediately returned to the north wall. Wuming couldn't help but frown as he went deeper into the abyss created by Gorgon's destruction. He had not reached the bottom yet. Did Gorgon directly penetrate the underworld when he destroyed the underground? Wuming couldn't help but ask. It wasn't Wuming's fault. After all, the deeper they went, the colder it got. The surrounding rocks gradually became similar to the underworld. But if that was the case, then Wuming had doubts. Why did Ereshkigal move the underworld here? There weren't many underworld that followed Ereshkigal to the Mesopotamia. Most of the land was centered around Kuza city. Although Ereshkigal could move the underworld, but there was no need to move the underworld outside the north wall. It was too strange. The deeper Wuming went, the more he felt that this was indeed the underworld. Because he saw the spear cages inserted into the ground. There were still sporadic garrulous spirits. It's a little troublesome. Although Wuming guessed that Ereshkigal was on the side of the humans, but she used the same method as the Quetzalcoatl to cause her to stand on the opposite side of the humans. But, for now, Ereshkigal was still a member of the Three Goddesses Alliance. Gorgon and Funbaba broke in, plus Kingu who escaped Wuming into the underworld, and Wuming who chased after Kingu. With so many extraordinary beings breaking into the underworld, Ereshkigal was bound to be dissatisfied. These beings who entered the underworld could be regarded as Ereshkigal's enemies. Even if Ereshkigal's temper was good, she was still the queen who controlled the underworld. More importantly, Gorgon brought people to attack the underworld. Ereshkigal might be angry because of this. Just like now. Boom. Chapter 979. The violent tremors shook the entire underworld. It was as if the Lord of the Underworld was enraged. And this angry Lord of the Underworld could only be Ereshkigal. Sure enough, she's angry. Wuming couldn't help but nod. He was right. It was like a person who liked to live alone. If several uninvited guests suddenly broke into this person's house, and they were the kind that fought, if Wuming was that person, Wuming would definitely be angry. And once a master who had almost perfect absolute power in the home got angry, the consequences were really unimaginable. It was fine if something happened to Gorgon because of Ereshkigal's anger. After all, he was an enemy. Wuming's main concern was Funbaba. Funbaba was like a pet to Wuming, and also like a partner. The Funbaba that had fused with Yggdrasil was also Wuming's weapon. No matter what, Wuming could not let anything happen to Funbaba. With this thought in mind, Wuming sped up a little. After a while, Wuming finally left the long passage and really came to the underworld. Then, he landed on a broken stone pillar. Wuming looked at the dim underworld. It was still the same realm filled with stone pillars and stone bridges, and it gave people a feeling that it was endless. And such a common scene would make people feel despair and death. The underworld is really full of death everywhere. Wuming couldn't help but sigh. This was the second time Wuming came to the underworld, but Wuming could only say simple and specific words like desolation and death in Wuming's evaluation. After all, no matter who it was, when they saw a world that looked like it was dead, they would have such a feeling. Moreover, because the underworld had not seen the sun all year round, no, it should be because there was no sun since ancient times, countless death aura filled the entire underworld. If an ordinary living person entered the underworld by mistake, he would probably die in a few minutes. Even Gadotsi, who was equipped with the new magic dress invented by Da Vinci, would not last long. In a sense, preventing living creatures from entering the underworld could be regarded as saving others' lives in disguise. Although there were no living creatures in the underworld, there were many moving objects, such as the Garrula spirit, the Soul Reaper. Of course, there were also some resentful spirits that had left the spear cage and walked in the underworld because of the disrepair of the spear cage. Moreover, the land of the underworld also had no other landscape except for stones. In the absence of animals, it was even more impossible for plants to exist in the underworld. To be honest, the underworld that did not even have a single flower was a little pitiful. In short, Ereshkigal's spear cage inserted into the ground could be regarded as a unique landscape in the underworld. However, Wuming did not have time to appreciate these landscapes. It was more important to get down to business. Wuming flew quickly toward a place below where the concentration of magic power was obviously different from other places. After crossing a large number of stone bridges, climbing over countless stone pillars, and passing by a few stone platforms, Wuming even bypassed a huge stone pillar that could be called a mountain. Finally, Wuming arrived at his destination. Wuming vaguely saw the figure of Fanbaba on Gorgon. Not only that, but Wuming also vaguely saw the phantom of a huge Garrula spirit. It seemed to be Ereshkigal. However, because of the death aura in the underworld, it had the effect of interfering with Wuming's vision, making Wuming unable to see clearly. But since he could not see clearly, he would take a closer look. He sped up and broke through the death aura of the underworld. The scene in the deepest part of the underworld was reflected in Wuming's eyes. Then, Wuming could not help but be shocked. This was an extremely desolate and empty site without the slightest building. There was only desolation and vastness. However, this desolation made this site seem wider. However, this place was indeed larger than any platform Wuming had seen on the road. It was not a visual error, but Wuming's true judgment. Whether it was Gorgon, Fanbaba, or the huge Garrula spirit transformed by Ereshkigal, the three were not small, but when they were in this desolate open space at this moment, they did not seem crowded at all. On the contrary, they seemed quite small. However, Wuming was not surprised by this, but the situation at the scene. Fanbaba was lying on the side obediently, which made Wuming breathe a sigh of relief. The huge Garrula spirit transformed by Ereshkigal stabbed the light spear in her hand into the ground. Her body was still trembling slightly, and she seemed to be struggling. As for Gorgon, he was the one that surprised Wuming the most. The black mud completely covered Gorgon's body. The black mud, which could be considered a liquid, was constantly flowing on Gorgon's body, giving people the feeling that it was a lump of black mud in the shape of Gorgon that could flow on its own. However, Wuming was sure that this was Gorgon. Not to mention Gorgon's huge body, Fanbaba entered the underworld with Gorgon. What's more, as the lord of the underworld, Ereshkigal was personally present. This lump of black mud was definitely Gorgon. However, how did Gorgon become like this? Wuming was used to Gorgon's changes due to the black mud from time to time, but the change this time was really not trivial. Those who did not know would think that this was really a lump of black mud. Not only that, but Gorgon was also surrounded by huge stones, and the black mud on Gorgon's body seemed to be restricted, unable to flow out of the circle formed by these stones. At that moment, Wuming saw what was going on. Gorgon should have been restricted by Ereshkigal using the authority of the underworld, but judging from Ereshkigal's situation, she seemed to be struggling quite a bit. Perhaps the restriction on Gorgon would not last long, and Fanbaba should know that it could not help much, so it lay on the side and rested. However, just as Wuming was thinking, Fanbaba, who discovered Wuming, immediately got up and ran over. Woo woo woo, dash, Fanbaba directly rubbed its big green fur face against Wuming, and it also made a cheerful cry. This could be said to be the first time Fanbaba and Wuming officially met after being separated for so long. Although it was in the underworld, Fanbaba was still very happy. Now that Fanbaba discovered Wuming, Ereshkigal naturally also discovered the existence of Wuming. Sien. Hyunryong. Ereshkigal's huge garrulous spirit couldn't help but cry out. If only listening to the voice, it was somewhat similar to Ishtar's voice, and more importantly, this voice was full of panic, which made people feel that it was quite cute. However, Wuming, who heard this voice, was directly stunned. What's with Ereshkigal's girlish voice? Chapter 980. Ereshkigal. Wuming asked doubtfully, and he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Any intellectual existence could see that Wuming was very confused at the moment. Funbaba was like this, and Ereshkigal was even more so. However, this was something that couldn't be helped. Wuming had only seen Ereshkigal once. It was when he met Ereshkigal in the underground underworld near Abif Mountain. At that time, Ereshkigal's voice sounded full of majesty. It was completely in line with the titles of the Mistress of the Underworld and the Queen of the Garrula Spirit. But the voice that Ereshkigal made just now could be said to be completely different from the voice that Ereshkigal made before. It was like two different people. If Wuming wasn't sure that the other party was indeed Ereshkigal, Wuming suspected that Ereshkigal was disguised by Ishtar. After all, Ereshkigal's voice was too similar to Ishtar's. Ahem. Sure enough, you also came to my underworld, Hyunryong. After hearing Wuming's questioning voice, Ereshkigal immediately adjusted her voice and returned to the previous queen-like way of speaking. Seeing that Ereshkigal changed her voice, Wuming didn't pursue this matter anymore. After all, Funbaba is my partner, and Gorgon is my enemy. I have to come over. As Wuming said, Funbaba rubbed against Wuming again. However, Ereshkigal sneered at this, but not at the relationship between Funbaba and Wuming, but at the uninvited provocation of Wuming and the others. You know, this is my underworld. You can't come in casually, whether it's a human or a god. The last time I let you and the goddess of greed leave was entirely because of your special identity, but this doesn't mean that you can come in my underworld whenever you want. In the blink of an eye, a large amount of mana was released from the garrulous spirit's body, forming a shockwave that caused the surrounding temperature to drop even lower. Ereshkigal's demeanor as the mistress of the underworld could be said to be vividly displayed. However, Wuming didn't care and even wanted to laugh. However, this made Ereshkigal feel that Wuming was insulting her, so she became even angrier. The temperature of the underworld dropped again and again, and a layer of frost rose on Funbaba's hair. Wuming even felt a trace of coldness. This made Wuming look at Ereshkigal in a new light. But at the same time, Wuming's smile became more intense. However, Wuming's smile was not because of Wuming's arrogance. Wuming was full of smiles because of Ereshkigal. You'd better save some magic power to deal with Gorgon. As soon as Wuming said this, the huge garrula spirit transformed by Ereshkigal couldn't help but tremble. Ereshkigal understood what Wuming meant. He instantly saw her current difficulty. Restraining Gorgon, who was completely stained with black mud at this moment, already made Ereshkigal suffer. For the sake of her face, she diverted some magic power to deal with Wuming. This was a huge burden for Ereshkigal. Adding hail to snow was light. Therefore, Wuming's smile was not mocking Ereshkigal for being half-hearted at this time. Wuming just felt that Ereshkigal was a little like Ishtar. For a long time, Ishtar had made humans worry a lot, but it was only to the extent of worry. Humans did not have hatred for Ishtar. In other words, Ishtar was not an evil god. At best, she was just a good god who kept doing evil. As mentioned before, Ishtar was the mistress of the sky and the most beloved daughter of the gods. Even if there were some reasons that caused Ishtar to start doing evil, those evil were still some evil that was not serious. For example, in the myths, Dumas and Nilgal were tricked by Ishtar into the underworld and paid a certain price. But overall, the two were gods, so the price was nothing. Even if it was more extreme, they could be resurrected after death. Also, Ishtar was humiliated by Gilgamesh and released the bowl of heaven to wreak havoc on the earth for 7 years, causing the humans in Mesopotamia to have no harvest. But Ishtar only let the bowl of heaven to wreak havoc on the earth, and did not let it kill humans. It could be said that as the mistress of the sky, Ishtar was completely a barbaric princess who often indulged herself but had a certain level of propriety. Although Ishtar's propriety was very low, in short, in Wuming's view, as a god who was the same divinity as Ishtar, but with a different side of divinity, Ereshkigal was not that bad. Ereshkigal's position in the myths was an evil god. She was the ruler of death and corruption, the queen of the underworld who ruled over the underworld. She was an evil god who was feared by humans. Before he met Ereshkigal, Wuming originally thought that Ereshkigal was an evil god who was described by the world. But after their last encounter, Wuming discovered that Ereshkigal actually loved humans very much. She was just prepared to use methods that the world could not accept to save humans, just like the feathered serpent god. And Ereshkigal's panicked voice to Wuming just now exposed some information about Ereshkigal, such as her sternness was fake. Ereshkigal was probably different from how she appeared and the myths that the world spread. Wuming felt that Ereshkigal was probably a goddess who was very easy to talk to. Ereshkigal and Ishtar were different sides of the same divinity. Ishtar was the mistress of the sky, a goddess who was in charge of harvest, a goddess who represented life, while Ereshkigal was the mistress of the underworld, a goddess who was in charge of corruption and death, a power that was undoubtedly feared. The powers of the two were opposite to each other to a certain extent. Since that was the case, their personalities might also be opposite. For example, Ishtar was the opposite of not easy to talk to at all and very arrogant, but Ereshkigal became very easy to talk to and kind to people. Wuming guessed that the world's fear of Ereshkigal was probably only because Ereshkigal was in charge of death, and Ereshkigal did not defend herself. Therefore, the human understanding of Ereshkigal stopped at a terrifying goddess. But because of this, Ereshkigal, who pretended to be cold and acted like a child in order to maintain the image that the world described, how could Wuming not feel gratified, amused, and laughed? Chapter 981. However, just 2 meetings could not prove anything at all. After all, these were just Wuming's guesses. Although they were close to the correct answer, guesses were still guesses. Before obtaining real information and hearing the truth from Ereshkigal, Wuming would not make a judgment easily. At that moment, Wuming no longer thought about this. Instead, he turned to pay attention to Gorgon. After all, Gorgon was quite attractive at the moment, but this attractive referred to the dangerous aspect. To understand Gorgon's situation, asking the person involved, Ereshkigal, was the most direct and effective way. Therefore, Wuming spoke directly. Ereshkigal, before I arrived, what happened to Gorgon? If he wanted to deal with Gorgon, he had to know what happened to him to become like this. If he was not careful, the root of the black mud was likely to flow into the underworld. At this moment, Gorgon was already an accident, and Wuming did not want another accident to happen. The giant garrulous spirit transformed by Ereshkigal glanced at Wuming. Although its huge skeletal eyes did not have eyeballs, Wuming could feel that Ereshkigal was indeed glaring at him, as if to say, "You are really rude." However, Ereshkigal finally told Wuming the truth. The battle between Gorgon and Funbaba disturbed the garrulous spirit and affected the peace of the underworld. However, because of the suppression of the underworld, the two were only fighting with brute force, and it did not cause much damage to the underworld. After all, the underworld suppressed divinity. Although Funbaba did not have divinity, it was not a living thing, in a sense after fusing with Yggdrasil, so it would also be suppressed to a certain extent. However, the size of the two was there, and it did not matter if their abilities were suppressed. The result was just as Ereshkigal said, it became a situation of fighting with brute force. After that, I showed up and used the authority of the underworld to suppress Funbaba and Gorgon. Even if the three goddesses' alliance was a cooperative relationship on the surface, it was a fact that Gorgon broke into Ereshkigal's territory and started a fight. However, because he did not attack Ereshkigal, Gorgon was not punished by the three goddesses' alliance. On the other hand, Ereshkigal used the authority of the underworld to suppress Ereshkigal and did not cause any harm to her. In addition, it was indeed Gorgon who broke into the territory of the other goddesses, so the alliance did not punish Ereshkigal. In this contradictory situation where both sides made mistakes and neither side was wrong, simply put, Gorgon would be suppressed in the underworld, but Ereshkigal could not hurt Gorgon. But for some reason, Gorgon showed signs of resisting the suppression of the underworld. It should be known that any god who entered the underworld would be suppressed, and Ereshkigal was a god who was born to manage the underworld. She was even given the authority to be invincible in the underworld. Therefore, the active suppression personally implemented by Ereshkigal was more absolute than the passive suppression of non-living beings by the underworld. According to what Ereshkigal said, Gorgon and Finbaba fought with brute force. It could be seen that the suppression of the underworld was indeed effective on Gorgon. However, the passive suppression of the underworld was effective on Gorgon, and the active and stronger suppression personally implemented by Ereshkigal on Gorgon was actually resisted by Gorgon. Most importantly, the agreement of the three goddesses' alliance was still in place, so how could Gorgon have the ability to resist? Hearing Ereshkigal's words, Wuming could not help but look at the origin black soil that completely covered Gorgon. The only existence that could make Gorgon resist Ereshkigal's authority was the origin black soil. After that, a lot of black matter emerged from Gorgon's body. Not only did it completely envelop Gorgon, but it also directly broke my suppression on Gorgon. Ugh, Ereshkigal, who said this, had a hint of panic, like a little girl who was pretending to be strong and was about to cry when she encountered an unsolvable problem. Ereshkigal's instantaneous breaking of the suppression made Wuming look at Ereshkigal in shock again. Moreover, this also made Wuming feel that his previous guess was right. However, the huge skeletal face of Ereshkigal, which was transformed into the giant Garrula spirit, did not show any emotion at all. And Ereshkigal probably also realized that she had broken the suppression again, so she quickly adjusted her tone and changed the topic. Ahem. The reason why I can suppress Gorgon now is because I obtained the result at the cost of my divinity, but the effect is still quite forceful. Wuming could not help but be stunned. It turned out that Ereshkigal had used her own divinity as the price to barely suppress Gorgon, and Ereshkigal, who was constantly consuming her divinity, would definitely not be able to hold on for long. This was the reason why Ereshkigal looked like she was struggling. No matter how stupid Ereshkigal was, she could see that this black mud was not something good. If this stuff flowed into the underworld, not to mention the harm it would cause, just cleaning it up would make Ereshkigal vexed for a while. The black mud is extremely corrosive. Inanimate objects are basically unaffected, but living objects might be an exception. If you allow the black mud to flow into the underworld, you'd better be prepared to give up on the underworld. Wuming's inanimate objects and living objects naturally referred to inanimate objects and living objects in a broad sense. For example, inanimate objects were the underworld, and living objects were the Garrula spirit. Wuming guessed that the black mud, which came from the same source as him, should also have the ability to ignore rules. It was precisely this ability that made Ereshkigal's suppression ineffective against Gorgon. Even if it could not compare to Wuming's ability to ignore the rules of the underworld, it was still very likely that Gorgon, who was engulfed by the black mud, could ignore the rules of the underworld of a world. However, Wuming's words gave Ereshkigal a fright. Ha! Is this thing so terrifying? But come to think of it, this thing attached to Gorgon allowed Gorgon to easily break through Ereshkigal's suppression. In the end, Ereshkigal had to pay the price of divinity to suppress Gorgon. Ereshkigal could naturally see that the black mud was different, but she did not expect Wuming to say such serious words. Therefore, Ereshkigal became a little dissatisfied. What do you mean by that? Chapter 982. To be honest, Wuming's words made Ereshkigal a little unhappy. What did he mean by giving up the underworld? As the mistress of the underworld, Ereshkigal seemed to have unlimited power. She held the authority of the underworld and could be said to be an invincible existence in the underworld. However, the disadvantage was quite obvious. Ereshkigal could not leave the underworld. It was not that Ereshkigal was unwilling to leave the underworld. She had no choice. As the cornerstone of the underworld's birth, Ereshkigal used the condition of not being able to leave the underworld in exchange for the effect of being invincible in the underworld. Because it was not Ereshkigal's initiative, it was comparable to a curse. The underworld had only stones and the Garrula spirit. It was also dark all year round. No matter what, Ereshkigal was a girl. How could she be willing to stay here? It was only for the sake of responsibility. However, this was not the main point. The main point was that Ereshkigal and the underworld were closely related. It was not an exaggeration to say that the two had a symbiotic relationship. However, Wuming asked her to give up the underworld. What was the difference between that and asking her to die? In this regard, Wuming explained. It's just an if. Don't be nervous. I won't let things develop to the point where the master of the underworld has no choice but to give up the underworld, Wuming said confidently. Wuming did not want to let Gorgon leave the underworld alive today. As Wuming spoke, he took out the divine blade of salvation from the golden ripples and flew toward Gorgon's huge body that was engulfed by the black mud. Did he really come down just to find the Funbaba? Did he have no intention of getting rid of Gorgon? The answer was, of course, that he did. Due to the backlash from Tiamat's authority and the origin black soil, Gorgon's entire god had become somewhat abnormal. If Wuming had to make an analogy, it would be that Gorgon had transformed from an avenger to a madman. If he continued to let Gorgon run free, something could happen to him. Furthermore, the magical beast army had mobilized in full force. Taking this opportunity to annihilate the enemy was the best course of action. How long can you suppress Gorgon? Wuming suddenly asked Ereshkigal. Ereshkigal didn't react for a moment. Can you suppress Gorgon, who might go berserk because of the threat of death? Ahem. Hyunryong, your self-righteous attitude is really annoying. Ereshkigal cleared her throat and unhappily replied to Wuming. Please answer truthfully. This is related to the following plan, as well as the situation of you and the underworld. At this moment, Wuming was like a god. His expression was rather serious, and his tone was filled with an undeniable charm. Perhaps Wuming didn't mean this, but only the strong could decide everything. Wuming had a way to get rid of Gorgon. Since that was the case, he had to be stronger than Ereshkigal. Probably due to Ereshkigal's natural mischief, she didn't realize that the atmosphere between her and Wuming had gradually become one of a superior and subordinate. She only decided that Wuming had suddenly become much more serious. Wuming's sudden seriousness made Ereshkigal a little overwhelmed. It was just like how Ishtar faced Wuming. However, compared to Ishtar's grievance toward Wuming, Ereshkigal felt more uneasy toward Wuming. At that moment, Ereshkigal also subconsciously ignored the fact that she continued to dress up as the goddess of fear and directly communicated with Wuming in her original voice. If I suppress her like this, I can suppress her until my divinity completely disappears. The pure girl's voice came from the huge Garrula spirit. It was slightly out of place, but Wuming's attention was no longer on this. He was paying attention to Ereshkigal's answer. The first half of the sentence made Wuming quite satisfied, but the second half of Ereshkigal's answer made Wuming stunned. As for whether I can suppress Gorgon who went berserk due to the threat of death, I don't know, Ereshkigal answered Wuming rather weakly. Probably because of her lack of confidence, Ereshkigal's last few words were pitifully soft. Fortunately, Wuming's hearing was good. However, Wuming hoped that he heard wrong. "What do you mean you don't know?" Wuming frowned. Ereshkigal's answer was related to the survival of the underworld. She gave Wuming an ambiguous answer like, "I don't know." How could Wuming deal with Gorgon next? Wuming was going to stab Gorgon's heart with the divine blade of salvation and use the power of the source in the divine blade of salvation to kill Gorgon as the core. In this way, these source black mud without a core were equivalent to lambs waiting to be slaughtered by Wuming. For the current Wuming to deal with the ownerless source black mud, Wuming expressed that it was a piece of cake. However, that was based on the assumption that Gorgon would not break Ereshkigal's suppression due to the threat of death. Although Wuming could still kill Gorgon, if Gorgon, as the source of the source black mud, broke through Ereshkigal's suppression and allowed the black mud to flow into the underworld, it would be quite troublesome to deal with the aftermath. In the event of an accident, Ereshkigal, who could not leave the underworld, might become the core of the next source black mud. Although Wuming and Ereshkigal had only met twice, Wuming had a good impression of Ereshkigal. Wuming did not want Ereshkigal to become his enemy. Of course, even if the source black mud flowed into the underworld after Gorgon broke through Ereshkigal's suppression, Wuming had a way to get rid of the source black mud. However, in that case, the underworld would probably be affected as well. In the best case, it would be half destroyed, and in the worst case, it would cease to exist. After all, there were not many underworlds that followed Ereshkigal back to the Mesopotamia. If Wuming carried out the cleansing indiscriminately, the underworld that returned with Ereshkigal would probably disappear. In that case, Ereshkigal would probably also leave. The curse of only being able to stay in the underworld was no joke. Without the underworld, Ereshkigal would undoubtedly leave. Wuming did not want to kill the enemy by sacrificing people who might become allies. What was the difference between that and killing the criminal along with the hostage? If that was the case, Wuming might as well let the black mud enter the underworld and erode Ereshkigal. Anyway, the result would be that Ereshkigal would leave because of Wuming. It would be the same no matter which side it was. Therefore, Wuming asked Ereshkigal if she could suppress Gorgon who might go berserk. Wuming wanted to use the method with the least loss. After all, the three goddesses' alliance was the enemy of mankind. Gilgamesh would probably happily say something like, "Isn't it great to take this opportunity to destroy the two pillars of the three goddesses' alliance?" However, since Wuming saw that Ereshkigal did indeed have another hidden side, Wuming would not do that. Chapter 983. Ereshkigal was obviously hiding something. Since Wuming did not kill the feathered serpent god when he captured her, and instead chose to rope her in after learning about her secrets, then Wuming would not attack Ereshkigal either. Wuming would make a decision after fully understanding Ereshkigal's situation. If Ereshkigal was really hiding something, then Wuming would try his best to rope in Ereshkigal. If Ereshkigal was just an evil god, then Wuming could punish her later. To put it simply, Wuming actually wanted to see a so-called happy ending. From this point of view, it was not surprising that Wuming and Merlin could become friends. I definitely know that these black things are up to no good, but they are Gorgon. She is a member of the Three Goddesses Alliance, just like me. Even if I can use my divinity to suppress Gorgon, there is no way I can suppress Gorgon who went berserk because of the threat of death. Ereshkigal refuted Wuming, feeling wronged. It was not that Ereshkigal did not know what was good for her. At this point, how could Ereshkigal not realize the seriousness of the problem? Just from the moment she had to use her divinity to suppress Gorgon, Ereshkigal realized that the problem was probably very serious. It was just that the person who made Ereshkigal realize this was the person who made it clear to her was Wuming. But she really could not do Wuming's request. Wuming fell silent and could not help but sigh. Then, he turned to look at Gorgon. The black mud on Gorgon's body was like a living thing, and it was still squirming. Even the underworld, which was so eerie that it could not be described as a scenery, was ruined by it. However, Gorgon himself seemed to be steadily suppressed by Ereshkigal and did not seem to want to break free. From Ereshkigal's answer, Wuming was clear of two things. Ereshkigal was not as powerful as he imagined, and Gorgon's origin black mud was the same. Ereshkigal used the sacrifice divinity to suppress Gorgon, which meant that the origin black mud was not very effective in the hands of Gorgon. At least, Wuming could easily suppress Gorgon. And Ereshkigal did not have the confidence to suppress Gorgon, who was likely to go berserk under the threat of death. This proved that Ereshkigal's suppression was not foolproof. In this case, it also meant that there might be uncertainty in Ereshkigal's words. For example, when she said that, "I can continue to suppress Gorgon until my divinity completely disappears," there might also be uncertainty. Maybe in the next second, Ereshkigal's suppression on Gorgon would be broken. At that moment, Wuming no longer thought about it. The saying, "a long delay means trouble," was very reasonable. Wuming flew directly to Gorgon's heart, raised the blade of salvation in his hand, and aimed it at Gorgon's heart. Wuming was ready to smash a broken pot. Everything would work out when the time came. Anyway, he had smashed such a broken pot many times, so this time would not make a difference. Hey. Don't be impulsive. I don't have the confidence to suppress Gorgon. Ereshkigal originally wanted to discuss with Wuming if there was any other way. In the end, Wuming rushed directly to Gorgon's heart, seemingly ready to directly stab that extraordinary weapon into Gorgon's heart. But what if Gorgon goes berserk? What if the black substance pollutes the underworld? Weren't you very worried before? Why are you suddenly not worried? A happy ending. Why don't you care about my life and death? Isn't this too cruel? Don't worry, my luck has always been very good. Wuming's implication was that with his luck, even if it was a broken pot, he could still smash it into a good pot. Ha! Ereshkigal was dumbfounded. Wuming dared to gamble, but Ereshkigal did not dare to gamble. Could he be more reliable? However, Wuming ignored Ereshkigal. Instead, he directly injected an unprecedented amount of magic power into the divine blade of salvation. Perhaps it was because the underworld was extremely dark, but the divine blade of salvation also emitted an unprecedented light. Suddenly, the entire underworld seemed to be illuminated by sunlight. The underworld, which had never seen the light of day from the beginning, was illuminated by light. The garrulous spirits hiding in the shadows were attracted by the light that scattered into the underworld, but because of the attribute restriction, they could not really touch the sunlight. They could only hide in the shadows and yearn for life. Even the undead yearned for the light full of life. No, it was more accurate to say that it was precisely because the undead had lost their lives that they yearned for the light that represented life. Not only the garrulous spirits, but Ereshkigal also had a change in her soul. My underworld is filled with light. Legend had it that Ereshkigal had no desires, but no one in the world could truly have no desires, not even the gods. The reason why Ereshkigal had no desires was because she knew that her desires were impossible to achieve. Over time, many of the desires that Ereshkigal desired were either forgotten by Ereshkigal or buried in the bottom of Ereshkigal's heart. Among them, illuminating the underworld with light was one of Ereshkigal's desires. All of a sudden, the huge garrulous spirit disappeared, and a blonde girl wearing a black and red cotton cloak and holding a spear of light appeared where the huge garrulous spirit had disappeared. If Wuming looked back now, he would find that the blonde girl's face and Ishtar's face were exactly the same. The two could be said to be sharing the same object. However, Wuming was not in the mood to pay attention to this at the moment. Like a wet blanket, he stabbed the divine blade of salvation straight into Gorgon's heart. Before stabbing, Wuming shouted at Ereshkigal without looking back. Ereshkigal, prepare to welcome Gorgon's rampage. Hey hey hey. Accompanied by Wuming's stern words and Ereshkigal's panicked voice, Gorgon, who was covered in black mud, began to struggle violently. The platform where the two were on began to shake violently. The stone pillar that Ereshkigal used to suppress Gorgon gradually cracked and then suddenly broke. Kacha, kacha, kacha. In just one exchange, almost half of the dozen huge stone pillars that suppressed Gorgon broke. Although the remaining half of the stone pillars were still intact, there were also cracks. With all the stone pillars broken, it was only a matter of time before Gorgon broke free. Please, Meslamtia. Chapter 984. Ereshkigal's clear, bell-like voice resounded throughout the underworld. With just this sentence, the majesty of the underworld's mistress was vividly displayed. Afterwards, Ereshkigal imbued almost all of her divinity into the light spear in her hand, Meslamthia. In an instant, the stone pillars that had been broken by Gorgon's struggle were restored, and the berserk Gorgon was once again suppressed. However, although she had successfully suppressed Gorgon again, the effect was not as effective as before. This was probably because Gorgon was currently under the threat of death. A large mouth split open on Gorgon's head, and an inhuman cry like that of a berserker came out from it. Gorgon's teeth, tongue, and other organs could not be seen in this mouth. It was pitch black, and it seemed that Gorgon's body was also filled with black mud. Countless snake hair mixed with black mud rippled around Gorgon's head. Probably because it was suppressed, although the snake hair fluttered, it was as if it was drunk and swaying. Not only that, the black mud flowed out from the cracks in the stone pillars and began to gradually cover the surrounding space. It seemed that the method of mending the pen after the sheep was lost could not be compared to the previous method. Hey! Hyunryong. Hurry up and think of something. I can't hold on for long. Ereshkigal gritted her teeth as she looked at Wuming, who was floating in the air. This was partly because Ereshkigal was dissatisfied with Wuming's inaction at the moment, and also because of the difficulty of forcefully suppressing Gorgon. Wuming ignored Ereshkigal's complaints and observed his surroundings. Kingu actually did not appear. Wuming said indifferently. That's right, Wuming was actually waiting for Kingu to appear. Wuming originally thought that Kingu would appear when Gorgon's life was in danger. After all, from all the previous signs, it was clear that Kingu's concern for Gorgon came from the bottom of his heart and was not fake. But strangely, when Gorgon's life was in danger, Kingu did not appear. After all, Wuming had chased Kingu into the underworld. Kingu must be here to help Gorgon. Why didn't he show himself? Wuming shook his head. Wuming did not have the luxury of time to think. Since Kingu was not going to show up, he would have to ask Gorgon to leave today. I am the strongest, and I hold victory in my hands. Be it human or demon, I am a person who can defeat all enemies, and I will defeat any enemy that stands in my way. Giants who possess unparalleled divine power, please help me. In an instant, Wuming's body exploded with extraordinary divine power. Golden light gathered on Wuming's right arm, forming a solid giant arm. Divinity. Ereshkigal was shocked. This was the underworld. Why wasn't the Hyunryong's divinity nullified? However, Wuming did not pay attention to Ereshkigal. Instead, he focused on Gorgon. Gorgon's rampage intensified as he sensed the threat of death. His huge body began to move violently as he once again let out that inhuman voice. It's over, Gorgon. Wuming used his huge golden right arm to hit Gorgon's heart. Only the hilt of the divine saber of salvation was exposed. In the next second, the divine saber of salvation that was wreaking havoc in Gorgon's heart sank into Gorgon's body. Then, Wuming released the true name of the divine saber of salvation, which had turned into his own noble artifact. Purify her, divine saber of salvation, Excalibur. The divine saber of salvation, which had completely sunk into Gorgon's heart, exploded with extreme power and reacted violently with Gorgon, who was completely covered by the black origin mud. This stimulation gave Gorgon a final burst of strength, and he instantly broke free from Ereshkigal's suppression. Ereshkigal slumped to the ground, and even Miss Slamtia fell out of her hand. The stone pillars around Gorgon were all shattered and turned into supersonic bullets, scattering in all directions. Just as they were about to hit the unprepared Ereshkigal, a figure blocked in front of Ereshkigal. This person was Wuming. Wuming raised the huge right arm of the giant incarnation and blocked Ereshkigal, helping Ereshkigal block the gravel that could have killed her at this moment. Thank you. Ereshkigal, who was sitting on the ground in a duck posture, was stunned, but she still blurted out the words of gratitude, although it was more or less unnatural. This made Wuming turn his head to look at Ereshkigal. Then, why did you save me? Probably a little embarrassed by Wuming's gaze, Ereshkigal asked a question that was baffling to Wuming. After Ereshkigal asked this question, Wuming turned his head back and looked at Gorgon, who was about to die. I don't need a reason to save people. Ha! Ereshkigal was shocked by Wuming's words. What kind of answer was that? There was nothing wrong with that statement, but Ereshkigal did not think that this sentence was suitable for Wuming. Wuming immediately changed his words. I can't leave you in the lurch. You and I fought against Gorgon together, so we can be considered as half a comrade. Moreover, I am Ishtar's teacher. Even if we have only met twice, you are still Ishtar's sister, so you can be considered as half a student of mine. Wuming was implying that it was natural for teachers to protect their students. However, Ereshkigal thought that these reasons were a little far-fetched. Wuming naturally understood that these words were indeed far-fetched. In fact, Wuming's real reason was that he believed that there was a hidden reason why Ereshkigal became the enemy of mankind. Wuming didn't think that a person who would subconsciously say thank you to someone who helped him was a bad person. If such a person was a bad person, then those who really committed all kinds of crimes didn't even deserve to be called a bad person. Although Wuming had a real reason, Wuming would not say it out loud because it would be disrespectful to Ereshkigal. I think you were forced. I think you are a good person, so I chose to save you. If Wuming said that, it would seem a little self-righteous. Although in Ereshkigal's opinion, Wuming was already very self-righteous, in short, the reason was not important. Wuming saved Ereshkigal, that was all. After understanding this point, Ereshkigal did not say anything else. Instead, she and Wuming looked at Gorgon. Gorgon's final radiance had ended. The black mud that covered Gorgon's body and the divine blade of salvation that erupted from Gorgon's heart had all been destroyed. Gorgon appeared in front of Wuming and Ereshkigal. Chapter 985. Hyunryong, you've won this time. As the saying goes, when a man is about to die, his words are kind. Gorgon, who was not a Khanate demon, was no exception. Gorgon, who realized that he was hopeless, did not have the viciousness of an avenger. Instead, he revealed the serenity of a young girl. At this moment, Gorgon's serenity reminded Wuming of two people. One was Anna, and the other was naturally Athena in the God-Slayer world. It had to be said that the pseudo-three-eyed loli had always been quite serene. In the end, Athena in that world was also Gorgon. After all, they were a trinity. The reason why Athena's clone in the God-Slayer world became a demon was because of the changes in the inheritance of that world. The gods in the God-Slayer world were bound by the inheritance of humans. Originally, they were powerful existences that were not gods. In order to protect themselves, humans used myths to bind these powerful existences. Later, because the matriarchal clan changed into a patrilineal clan, the myths were modified, and the gods bound by the myths were also changed. The reason why Gorgon in the Moon world was born was because of humans. If it weren't for those guys who dreamed of being a hero every day and went on a crusade against the three sisters who were gods, Medusa wouldn't have gone berserk from the slaughter and devoured her two sisters, eventually becoming a hero killer, the monster Gorgon. However, if there was good, there would be evil. This evil corresponded to the good of humans. As long as the human race existed, this would never change. Now that he thought about it, there were many reasons why Anna appeared in this singularity. The most obvious one was that Anna's real name was related to Gorgon. Although Anna had never told anyone her real name, Wuming already knew about Anna's identity. After all, Wuming had seen Anna in Winterwood. Wuming estimated that Gadotzi and the others should have guessed Anna's real name by now. It was just that everyone tacitly did not mention it. According to Wuming's understanding, Gadotzi and the others were the kind of people who would not pursue the matter as long as the other party did not voluntarily reveal their real names. The possibility of Anna revealing her real name was also not high. Because Gorgon was about to leave, in a sense, there was no need for Anna to reveal her real name. As for the other point that Wuming guessed, it was because of the Holy Grail that Wuming left behind in this singularity. I wonder if Kingu did anything to the Holy Grail. Wuming muttered. Gorgon saw that Wuming was obviously thinking about something else. Although she knew that Wuming had neglected her, she was not angry at all. It was almost time for her to leave. A shattered wound appeared where Gorgon's heart was. The crack spread from Gorgon's heart to Gorgon's whole body. It seemed that Gorgon was about to leave. Gorgon, where did you get this black mud? The sound of Gorgon's body shattering attracted Wuming's attention. He had a lot of questions. At the very least, he needed to let Gorgon do something before he left. However, Gorgon did not know why he smiled at this question. This is Tiamat's power. After Gorgon said this, he did not say anything else. The cracks on Gorgon's body grew bigger and bigger, as if they would shatter in the next second. Tiamat's power. Wuming muttered silently. Gorgon's answer did not satisfy Wuming. Wuming mainly wanted to know if Gydia did anything to this singularity. The Mesopotamia singularity was a time point before Gydia's time. The formation of this singularity was also personally arranged by Gydia. This already showed how special this singularity was. At least, it was more special than the previous 6 singularities. However, starting from the 5th singularity, Gydia and Wuming began to fight openly and covertly. Gydia created many holy grails and threw them into the 5th singularity in an attempt to use the various follower forces to cause trouble for Wuming, Chaldea, and the others. In the end, Gydia happened to enter the 5th Mesopotamia as one of the forces. In the end, not only did Gydia not cause much trouble for Wuming, Chaldea, and the others, but Wuming also found Gydia's hiding place and fought him. Although Wuming lost his body because of this, Gydia did not have it easy either. This was certain. However, because Wuming's body fell into another world, and because the flow of time in each world was different, Wuming was not in a hurry to find his body. At the very least, Gydia would take much longer to recover than Wuming. Probably because Gydia knew how powerful Wuming was, Gydia did not do anything to the 6th singularity. Gydia was also a smart person. If what happened at the 5th singularity was Gydia looking down on Wuming, then after the 5th singularity ended and Wuming came to fight with Gydia, Gydia no longer looked down on Wuming. He knew that his little tricks could not affect Wuming, so he simply did not care. The 6th singularity was like that. From Flora's words, Wuming vaguely learned that Gydia did not know that multiple demon god pillars had come to the 6th singularity. It could be said that this was completely done by Floros and the other demon god pillars. However, Floros probably did not expect to kill Wuming. Floros was not stupid. At most, he wanted to stall for time. However, who would have thought that Wuming was serious about Floros' little trick this time? In the end, Floros was stripped from the concept of the 72 demon god pillars, and was sealed into the Holy Grail by Wuming. In addition, Wuming and one of the strongest in the sixth singularity, Artoria, were old acquaintances. Moreover, he had the help of the crown assassin, the old man of the mountain, Hassan Sabah. Although the old man basically did not make a move, Wuming, who realized the principle of take advantage of the situation, found his body in the box world. Moreover, because of the long time in the box world, Wuming was about to reach adulthood. He was only one step away, which was a pleasant surprise. Wuming did not believe that Gideon was his opponent now. After the matter of the seventh singularity was over and all singularities were repaired, Wuming would settle the score with Gideon. In short, although Wuming did not think that Gideon would do anything to the seventh singularity, the black soil that Gorgon had made Wuming suspicious. But since Gorgon said that it was Tiamat's authority, then it might really be Tiamat's authority. Putting aside whether Gorgon knew about Gideon's matter, even if Gorgon knew, if Gorgon did not want to say, Wuming would not force him. Just like how Wuming knew that Gorgon did not know that Anna had descended as a servant, he would not tell Gorgon about Anna. Chapter 986. As Wuming pondered, Gorgon's body cracked even more. Finally, without saying a word, Gorgon's huge body shattered and turned into mana particles that dissipated in the underworld. At this point, the magical beast goddess who had wreaked havoc in Mesopotamia for half a year was killed in an extremely aggrieved manner by having her heart pierced by an enemy while she was unprepared. At the same time, in the southwest forest, in the territory of the feathered serpent god, Anna, who had been injured by fighting against Uxie-Mughar, suddenly looked in a certain direction in the north as if she had telepathically sensed something. The cloaked girl hugged her body with both hands and looked as if she did not know what to do. She muttered silently. Gorgon, in the underworld, Wuming did not feel proud or guilty about killing Gorgon. After all, even if they were to fight face to face, he could still kill Gorgon. It would just be a little more troublesome. It could only be said that it was a matter of luck. Who would have thought that Gorgon would come to the underworld? Who would have thought that Ereshkigal would join forces with Wuming? Who would have thought that Wuming would take advantage of Ereshkigal's restraining of Gorgon to send the divine blade of salvation into Gorgon's heart? This was the so-called time and fate. With a wave of his hand, Wuming took the divine blade of salvation into his hand and raised it high. Light once again shone on the underworld, but this time the light was gentler than before. When Gorgon broke free, some of the black soil flowed into the underworld. Wuming was responsible for dealing with it. No, it should be said that only Wuming, who had mastered the power of the source, could completely eliminate the black soil. Ereshkigal, who was behind Wuming, once again fell into a daze because of the light shining on the underworld. After a short while, the remaining black soil of the underworld was cleaned up by Wuming. The light disappeared and Wuming put away the divine blade of salvation. Wuming turned around and looked at Ereshkigal, who was still sitting on the ground in a daze. What are you doing? Why are you in a daze? Wuming's words brought Ereshkigal back to her senses and she immediately lowered her head. Although the underworld was still dark, Wuming could still see Ereshkigal's red cheeks due to embarrassment. However, Wuming was also used to Ereshkigal's girlish behavior. She was much more pleasing to the eye than Ishtar. Ereshkigal, what are you going to do next? Ereshkigal was a little confused. What did he mean by, what are you going to do next? Well, let me ask another question. Gorgon, one of the three goddesses, has left. I have also drawn the other pillar goddess to the human side. Now, you are the only enemy left. The alliance between the three goddesses has indirectly collapsed. Are you going to continue attacking the Uruk, or are you going to stop? Ereshkigal was obviously stunned by Wuming's words. She had never thought about this question. After all, no matter who it was, humans were unable to resist the gods. Therefore, the end result would be a certain pillar goddess attacking the Uruk, seizing the Uruk's cup, and finally facing the attack of the remaining two goddesses. Just like Merlin's analysis of Gadotzi and the others' narration before, the three goddesses would ultimately have to rely on force to decide the outcome. In the end, who would have thought that one of them would leave and another would be instigated, leaving Ereshkigal alone? You want to create a kingdom of death, right? Why would you have such an idea? Since the underworld existed, the souls of those who died in the battle in the past 6 months would come to the underworld. Not only that, but the people of Khazar City had also inexplicably died overnight. This was undoubtedly Ereshkigal's doing. And from the number of souls in the spear cages that Wuming had seen when he entered the underworld twice, those people must have been imprisoned there. It was obvious that Ereshkigal wanted to create a kingdom of death. Even if Wuming's guess was not completely correct, it was probably not far from the truth. Ereshkigal did not speak. Instead, she remained silent and slowly lowered her head. Do you want to protect the humans? If the human body could not be protected, then at least the human soul could be preserved. Ereshkigal probably had this idea in mind when she joined the alliance of the three goddesses. Ereshkigal suddenly raised her head and looked at Wuming with astonishment, as if to say, "How did you know?" However, Wuming replied with a natural smile. At this point, if Wuming still could not figure it out, how stupid would he be? People say that the female ruler of the underworld, Ereshkigal, is the goddess of fear. I originally thought so too, but in the 2 times that I came into contact with you, I didn't find how terrifying you are. I think the reason why people think so is only because they are afraid of the death that you control. If a person looked fierce and was very solitary and had no friends, even if this person's heart was kinder than anyone else's, there would definitely be people around who judged people by their appearance. Then, this person would inevitably be regarded as a bad person because of his fierce appearance. In addition, this person was solitary and had no friends. After rumors spread, this person's identity as a bad person would be confirmed. Ereshkigal was probably the same. Because she was the female ruler of the underworld and controlled death, coupled with the fact that Ereshkigal could not leave the underworld and could not show her kind side to people, this caused people on the land to be more and more afraid of Ereshkigal. The name of the mother goddess of fear was passed down. It was precisely because people thought of her as the mother goddess of fear that Ereshkigal would dress up as the mother goddess of fear. Because her heart was not the character of the mother goddess of fear, she did not pretend to be the mother goddess of fear in time when she discovered Wuming. Instead, she maintained her original character. Because of this, Ereshkigal panicked because she was afraid that the secret of her disguise as the mother goddess of fear would be discovered. How could a girl who would try her best to play such a role because of rumors and panicked and broke her disguise when her little secret was discovered be a bad person? And the most important point, a person who will subconsciously say thank you to others. I really don't think such a person is the so-called mother goddess of fear. Ereshkigal was much better than Ishtar in this way. Since Wuming had said so much, no matter how stupid Ereshkigal was, she could understand that Wuming had almost figured it out, even if he was just guessing. Then, Ereshkigal spoke. You're right. I don't want to destroy the Uruk like Gorgon. I only want to protect the souls of humans. Evil will also help humans in evil ways. This is my way. Chapter 987. Wuming thought to himself, sure enough. Learning from Ereshkigal and guessing on your own were 2 completely different things. When Ereshkigal admitted it, Wuming was also relieved. After all, this could prove that Ereshkigal and Quetzalcoatl were the same. They were both gods who cared about humans but used special methods to save them. So, back to my previous question, what are you going to do next? The only evil god in the 3 goddesses alliance who wanted to destroy humans had already left, and the other good god had long been instigated by Wuming. In the 3 goddesses alliance, only Ereshkigal was left. It was natural that Wuming would ask Ereshkigal what she was going to do next. However, Ereshkigal sighed. The forced suppression of Gorgon just now consumed almost all of my divinity, and my behavior just now could be considered to have caused harm to Gorgon. The covenant of the three goddesses' alliance is not something I can defy. At this moment, I am only able to survive because of the relationship between the underworld and me. If it was not for the connection between the underworld and me that allowed me to survive, you might not be able to see me. I think you should be very clear about this point. After all, in Ereshkigal's view, it was inconceivable that Wuming could not detect the changes in her now. Indeed, as Ereshkigal said, Wuming had actually been aware of the changes in Ereshkigal's body at this moment. The divinity in Ereshkigal's body had almost completely disappeared, and Ereshkigal's spiritual base had also become extremely fragile, as if it would break with a touch. Ereshkigal immediately asked, "Why don't you just kill me directly? Right now, I am extremely weak. After all, I am a member of the Three Goddesses Alliance, an enemy of mankind." What Ereshkigal meant was that once she was killed, there would be no follow-up troubles. There would be no need to ask what Ereshkigal was going to do next, and there would be no need to worry that Ereshkigal would continue to deal with the humans. After she was killed, the Three Goddesses Alliance would truly collapse, and the humans would be saved. This singularity would also be fine. It was simply a profitable business. However, Wuming shook his head. "I can even spare the good gods who do evil, so why can't I spare the evil gods who do good?" Ereshkigal was stunned. She knew that Wuming was comparing her to Ishtar. Indeed, although Ishtar was a good god, Ishtar often did some evil things. Although the degree of evil was not high, the sentence, "do not do evil because it is small," was always useful. On the other hand, Ereshkigal was an evil god in name, but she joined the Three Goddesses Alliance to deal with the humans in a roundabout way. She thought that she could not save Mesopotamia, so in order to save the humans, she chose to collect the souls of the humans and store them in the underworld to save them. Ereshkigal's approach was somewhat similar to that of Artoria, who had the Holy Lance, but after all, they were different. After all, Ereshkigal only preserved the souls of the humans. Ishtar and Ereshkigal were different sides of the same divinity, so it was natural to compare them. The enemy of the humans is not the Three Goddesses Alliance. The only enemy of the humans is the goddess of warcraft. Ereshkigal and Quetzalcoatl did not join the Three Goddesses Alliance with the purpose of destroying the humans. They joined the Three Goddesses Alliance to help and save the humans. But Gorgon has already been destroyed by you, right? Without talking about the goddess of warcraft, Wuming directly answered Ereshkigal on the other hand. "Didn't I say that I am Ishtar's teacher, and you are Ishtar's sister, so you are also half my disciple? The mistakes made by the disciple should be corrected and made up for by the teacher. Although it is natural for the teacher to punish the disciple, your safety is also part of my responsibility. After knowing your secret, if I still choose to kill you, then it is really my fault. And if Ishtar knows about it, she will not forgive me." Regardless of whether these words were true or false, Wuming was not prepared to destroy Ereshkigal. Wuming's meaning was very clear, so how could Ereshkigal not understand? Suddenly, some tears appeared in Ereshkigal's eyes. This was the first time someone cared about her. But if Wuming knew what Ereshkigal was thinking, he would probably laugh it off. With Ereshkigal's EQ, which was raised as a young lady who did not know about the world because she stayed in the underworld for a long time, she probably would not realize that someone cared about her. For example, Ishtar, who was actually very concerned about her half. However, one was too arrogant and did not show any concern, while the other's EQ was too low and did not notice the other's concern. This caused both of them to not realize the other's meaning, which was really regrettable. And, the most important reason, then, Wuming's tone changed. "The goddess of warcraft is still alive." Ha! Ereshkigal was dumbfounded. Could it be that Gorgon was fake? Was that why Kingu did not come to save her? But that was impossible. Gorgon was completely real to Ereshkigal. How could he be fake? Then, Wuming answered Ereshkigal's doubts. The real goddess of Warcraft is Tiamat. Ah! Ereshkigal was stunned. But Wuming naturally knew what Ereshkigal wanted to say. She was just asking for the reason. The reason is that the fake Enkidu's body allowed me to kill Gorgon. Wuming's eyes narrowed. Ha! What kind of reason was that? I've seen Gorgon and Kingu a few times before. I can feel that Kingu cares about Gorgon from the bottom of his heart. It's not fake. Ereshkigal expressed her opinion. Oh, you also call the fake Kingu. Ereshkigal understood what Wuming meant. Of course, she knew that the fake Kingu was not the real goddess of Warcraft. That's what he calls himself. Let's just call him that for now. Ereshkigal sighed helplessly, probably because she felt helpless about Wuming's seriousness. Then let's call him Kingu. It didn't matter if he called the fake Enkidu or Kingu. After all, it was just a small matter. There was no need to harp on it. The key was the relationship between Kingu and Gorgon. As you said, Kingu's feelings for Gorgon are real. Then why did Kingu allow Gorgon to leave? Wuming followed Kingu into the underworld, but Kingu was nowhere to be found. This was very strange. Ereshkigal was speechless. Indeed, Kingu's feelings for Gorgon were real. But if that was the case, why did Kingu abandon Gorgon? The only answer is that Kingu's feelings are not for Gorgon, but for the goddess of Warcraft. Chapter 988. It was obviously wrong to say that Gorgon, who held part of Tiamat's authority, was not the goddess of magical beasts. However, it was also wrong to say that Gorgon was the goddess of magical beasts, because Gorgon did not have the authority to give birth to magical beasts. Gorgon had only borrowed Tiamat's authority. That was why Kingu often called himself the son of the goddess of magical beasts, and not Gorgon's son. Even if Gorgon is dead, the goddess of magical beasts is still alive. That's why Kingu abandoned Gorgon. The underworld extended in all directions, and there were many stone pillars and bridges. It was not difficult to circle around Wuming and return to the surface. Meanwhile, Wuming was chasing after Gorgon and Funbaba, and neglected Kingu. Ereshkigal was suppressing Gorgon at the time, so it was normal that she did not notice Kingu's location. Ereshkigal closed her eyes for a few seconds before opening them again. There is no sign of Kingu in the underworld, only a trace left behind by him. Ereshkigal was, after all, the ruler of the underworld, and it was not difficult for her to detect the creatures in the underworld. It's just as you said. Kingu abandoned Gorgon. Ereshkigal could not help but sigh. Although they were on different sides, Ereshkigal felt a little sad for Gorgon. No matter how many excuses he had, Kingu betrayed Gorgon. Betrayal was the only thing that made one's heart turn cold. This was a topic that no matter which dynasty, whether human or god, would sigh endlessly. Then, Ereshkigal realized a problem. Wait! If the goddess of magical beasts is not Gorgon, but Mother, where would Mother be hiding? The Mesopotamia looked very big, but it was only a small area. The surface of the Mesopotamia was divided according to the forces, and most of the underground was occupied by Ereshkigal's underworld and Zhuge Kongming's noble phantasm. Tiamat's body was extremely huge, and it was said that her body was that of the dragon god. There was no place for her to hide. There was another important point. Tiamat was once exiled by the gods into the void, and it was not a place where one could casually come and go. If Tiamat could come out of the void, she would not have come out at the end of the gods' era. Ereshkigal's words reminded Wuming of the Persian Gulf. The dream he had about Tiamat was that he was in an ocean full of black mud. At that time, Wuming fell asleep near the Persian Gulf, and the Persian Gulf was connected to the Indian Ocean. It was easy for it to accommodate Tiamat's legendary huge body. Therefore, Tiamat was most likely hiding in the Persian Gulf. At the very least, she was hiding in the virtual space of the Persian Gulf. However, Wuming agreed with the former. Tiamat will definitely come out of the void. There is no doubt about that. Tiamat's authority was not so easy to take. If Tiamat was still in the void, even with the help of the Holy Grail, Gorgon would not be able to bless himself with Tiamat's authority. Wuming guessed that it was probably because of the collapse of human reason, coupled with Gidea's tricks, such as borrowing the power of the Holy Grail, that Tiamat successfully escaped from the void. For some unknown reason, she was sleeping somewhere in this world. Kingu was either simply there to meet up with Tiamat, or he was there to awaken the sleeping Tiamat. Wuming believed that it was the former. The black mud only appeared on Gorgon's body, and it did not invade the land. This means that Tiamat definitely hasn't come to this land yet, or she is also sleeping. In this regard, Ereshkigal nodded in agreement. If Tiamat had appeared in Mesopotamia, perhaps humanity would have been finished long ago, and they would still be able to resist for half a year. As the only native god in Mesopotamia's Sumer pantheon, it could be said that no one understood Tiamat's power better than Ereshkigal. Although she wasn't like Ishtar who could freely roam the world, Ereshkigal wasn't the kind of person who didn't care about worldly affairs. Ereshkigal was indeed quite reclusive, but not to mention that the garrulous spirit would bring her news of the surface, as her divine authority, Peddling, would also tell Ereshkigal stories of the surface from time to time, whether it was about humans or gods. Otherwise, if Ereshkigal had stayed in the underworld for tens of thousands of years, she wouldn't have gone crazy from boredom. At the very least, Ereshkigal wouldn't be like a young lady who lived in a boudoir like she was now. It had to be said that time could erase the soul of an intelligent creature, but it could also erase the soul of a god. It was rare for Ereshkigal, who could only stay underground and endure the curse of being imprisoned, to have the temperament of a young lady. If Ishtar and Ereshkigal were to exchange identities, perhaps Ishtar would be imprisoned for a long time and her soul would collapse and become an evil god. Of course, this was only an if. After all, Ishtar's personality was cultivated. If they were to exchange identities from the beginning, the outcome would be unpredictable. All in all, Ereshkigal was a god after all. Even if she didn't understand the affairs of the humans on the surface, she wouldn't and couldn't not understand the affairs of the gods. Gods wouldn't change for millions of years, unlike humans who would change dynasties in less than 100 years or even a dozen years. The mother has an ability called amino-geese, also known as cell coercion. It can transform the captured life forms into creatures that will completely obey the mother's orders and become the enemy of humans. This is the mother's most powerful and terrifying ability. Hearing Ereshkigal's explanation, Wuming felt that this was similar to the black root mud. This was probably why Ereshkigal could still remain calm after Gorgon admitted that the black root mud was Tiamat's authority. However, Ereshkigal didn't know that the black root mud in Gorgon's body was the black root mud. Wuming wouldn't mistake it. What was strange was that Gorgon clearly possessed the black root mud, but Gorgon said that it was Tiamat's authority. After all, Ereshkigal was a cornerstone that had been in the underworld since birth. It wasn't surprising that the black root mud Gorgon mentioned was Tiamat's authority. It could only be said that either Gorgon was lying, or Tiamat possessed the black root mud. In other words, her own authority had fused with the black root mud, which had a very similar effect. This wasn't good news. Chapter 989. After all, Wuming was not a native god of Sumer. Naturally, he did not know about Tiamat's crazy ability. But after Wuming thought of his trump card, he was relieved. After all, there was no need to panic. Wuming looked at Ereshkigal again. Move the underworld to a safe place. This way, Tiamat will not endanger you. As long as the underworld was moved to the north or below the mountains, as long as the underworld was not connected to the surface, Tiamat would not affect Ereshkigal underground. However, Wuming's words made Ereshkigal unhappy. I am also on the side of humans. Don't think of me as the same as Ishtar. Hearing Ereshkigal's complaint, Wuming could not help but smile. First of all, Ereshkigal did not understand Ishtar. Ishtar would not run away at such a critical moment for the survival of humans. Probably in Ereshkigal's mind, Ishtar was the greedy goddess who was addicted to treasures and overestimated herself. Second of all, Wuming also felt gratified for Ereshkigal. Ereshkigal's words also represented that Ereshkigal had answered Wuming's question. In short, it was good that Ereshkigal had the heart. Anyway, she could not do the specific thing. After all, you can't leave the underworld. There's no doubt about that. This was a hard point. Moreover, your spirit base is now so fragile that it can be broken with a light touch. Wuming's meaning was clear. Ereshkigal could not even protect herself. How could she help others? Ereshkigal once again fell into a state of embarrassment and blushed. This was something that couldn't be helped. After all, Wuming was right. Just stay in the underworld obediently. When the surface can't hold on any longer, I'll come to you for help. At that time, you won't be able to refuse even if you want to. Wuming said jokingly. Then, in a flash, he appeared on top of Funbaba. Remember to release the souls of the citizens of Kuza. Their bodies are still intact in the bottom level of the Uruk's divine tower. As for those who died in battle, they were truly dead. Even if their souls were released, they could not be resurrected. Alright, I got it. Probably no one had ever treated Ereshkigal so rudely before. This made Ereshkigal a little uncomfortable. She didn't even know how to react. But at the same time, Ereshkigal felt a little inferior to herself. Her whole face showed an "I'm very sad" atmosphere. Wuming, who was sitting on Funbaba's back, saw Ereshkigal's expression. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Ishtar was a little childish. Then, Wuming suddenly said. You're Ishtar's sister. No matter what, you have to be more elegant than Ishtar. Elegant? Ereshkigal silently analyzed this word. While Ereshkigal was analyzing elegance, Wuming silently chanted a sentence. With my spirit of speech, let the justice of the world appear. A golden short sword appeared in Wuming's hand. Since Ereshkigal was not confident, then he would help her. After all, he was half a disciple. Then, Wuming stabbed himself with the golden short sword. Ereshkigal was so scared that she couldn't speak. Was he trying to commit suicide? But then, Ereshkigal found a new problem. Why can you still use your authority in the underworld? Ereshkigal could feel that the golden short sword in Wuming's hand was a god's authority. But this was the underworld. If divinity was ineffective here, then naturally, authority would be ineffective. However, Ereshkigal immediately realized a problem. Since Wuming could use his divine authority, didn't that mean that Wuming could take her down when they first met? After all, in terms of divinity, Ereshkigal could only be considered a mid-tier god. Wuming was a foreign god that even the god king had to respect. There was no doubt that he could take her down. At that moment, Ereshkigal's face turned red. It was a pity that she had pretended to be the goddess of fear to scare him. In the end, he didn't mind at all. He didn't give her face as the queen of the underworld. Seeing Ereshkigal's face turn red, Wuming guessed Ereshkigal's thoughts. He shook his head indifferently. It was just a girl's temperament. There was no need to care. In the next second, the golden short sword that pierced Wuming's body disappeared. A ball of light appeared at the spot where the golden short sword pierced. This is for you. I don't really need it. With that, Wuming threw the ball of light to Ereshkigal. Then, Wuming opened a huge portal. Funbaba understood and jumped in directly. Ereshkigal, who subconsciously caught the ball of light, hugged it with both hands. It could be said that Ereshkigal was still sitting on the ground at this moment. If Ereshkigal was standing, she would definitely stagger a few steps when she caught the ball of light. Ereshkigal looked up in Wuming's direction. There was only a portal that had shrunk to the size of a fish left. Then, Ereshkigal looked down at the ball of light in her arms. With this look, Ereshkigal suddenly found something wrong. This is divinity. Ereshkigal immediately panicked. Wuming had given his divinity as the Hyunryong to Ereshkigal. The golden short sword could cut the enemy's power. Naturally, it could also cut Wuming's own. Wuming had used the golden short sword to cut his own divinity. Just as Wuming had said, Wuming had no use for this thing. His own power did not come from the divinity that was added by the legend of the Hyunryong. Therefore, to Wuming, this divinity did not matter to him. Ereshkigal's divinity had almost completely disappeared. The spirit base was only hanging on by a thread because of the underworld. It was obvious that Ereshkigal needed this more than Wuming. Divinity can be given away. Ereshkigal was stunned. She had never heard of a god giving away their own divinity. Could it be that Wuming's power had been weakened? Ereshkigal, who did not know what was going on, could not help but frown. She was not going to use it. She was going to find a chance to return it to Wuming. It was fine if she could not help him, but how could she drag him down? However, in the next second, the divinity that belonged to the Hyunryong slid into Ereshkigal's body. Suddenly, Ereshkigal was surrounded by a golden light. Chapter 990. Ha! Ereshkigal was confused once again. However, there was something else that made Ereshkigal even more confused. Beside Ereshkigal, there was a black-haired little girl wearing a robe and holding a staff. The little girl looked at Ereshkigal, and Ereshkigal looked at the little girl. The two of them stared at each other. Brother Wuming. The little girl looked at Ereshkigal with a tone of speculation, disbelief, and suspicion. Brother Wuming. Ereshkigal repeated the little girl's words, and showed an even more surprised expression. Who is Brother Wuming? On the surface of Mesopotamia, in a dense forest far away from the underworld. A huge black-purple ripple appeared here, and then a huge green creature walked out, and there was an extraordinary figure sitting on its back. The two of them were Funbaba and Wuming, who left through the portal. And this dense forest was Quizzard's territory. Wuming snapped his fingers, and closed the portal. Even the rules of the underworld could not restrict Wuming, so the underworld naturally could not restrict Wuming. Ereshkigal is really an interesting person. It's a pity that I can't stay for a while longer. Wuming recalled Ereshkigal's shocked expression, and his face was filled with joy. Wowo Funbaba called out twice, and it seemed like it did not understand Wuming's words. Wuming laughed, and then shook his head. It was normal for Funbaba not to understand Wuming's joy, and Ereshkigal might not understand Wuming's meaning. But then, Wuming could not laugh anymore. This was because Wuming felt an unusually large magical power coming from the east. That's the Persian Gulf. In an instant, Wuming guessed the source of such a large magical power. It's Tiamat, right? Gorgon's possession of Tiamat's power was not a simple possession, but a sharing. Only a shared death could make Tiamat immediately wake up, or rather, wake up. This was probably Kinga's goal. Kinga wanted Tiamat to appear, and Wuming wanted to end this singularity as soon as possible. I have to hurry. Although Silent Wonder had never seen Tiamat before and did not know how powerful she was, Silent Wonder would not underestimate her. Before Wuming's trump card was ready, he had to make some preparations to deal with Tiamat. Wuming thought as he released his mental power. After determining his current location, he retracted his mental power. Wuming found himself in the northwest part of the forest. This was the place where Wuming and Merlin met up on their way to Eridu. This could not be helped. Funbaba was too large to appear in the city, and Wuming had only stayed in this forest other than Eric Metropolis and UR. I wonder if the demonic beasts here have been eliminated. Wuming thought. Then, Wuming pointed in the direction of Eridu to Funbaba. Let's go, we'll head there. Heading towards Eridu, they would know the situation. Woo woo woo, Funbaba cried out again, and then ran in the direction Wuming pointed. Funbaba was obviously a huge existence, but it was like a fish in water. It did not knock down any trees in this forest. This was probably the talent of Funbaba as a forest beast. On the way, Wuming and Funbaba took advantage of this short idle time to chat. After all, even if the situation was critical, it was useless to be anxious. It was better to temporarily pin the hope of stopping Tiamat on Gilgamesh, while Wuming went to the battlefield in the forest to meet up with Gadotsi. Speaking of which, why did you run to my temple? I left you behind to help them, but you ended up sleeping in my temple. Although Funbaba looked bloated, it was probably due to the pressure from Tiamat. At this moment, Funbaba's speed was not slow at all. The rapid airflow flowed past Wuming's face. If it was an ordinary person, they might have suffocated. However, no matter how fast the airflow was, Wuming's words fell into Funbaba's ears. Woo woo woo, so that's how it is. It's not used to being away from Yggdrasil, so it fell asleep. This was something that Wuming did not expect. After all, Funbaba was a mythological beast and not a life in Yggdrasil. In Wuming's opinion, even if Funbaba was separated from Yggdrasil, it would not be a big problem. However, who would have thought that Funbaba had been fused with Yggdrasil for a long time, and the sudden separation would have a mental impact on Funbaba? Fortunately, the impact was not big. Then you come back first. Wuming said, opened the dragon nest space, and took out Yggdrasil. Wuming did not mean to let Funbaba return to Yggdrasil. Wuming meant to let Yggdrasil integrate into Funbaba's body. The two had already formed a symbiotic relationship, and it was not a problem at all who was in whose body. Wuming held Yggdrasil in a reverse grip and stabbed Yggdrasil into Funbaba's body that was full of green hair, but there was no bloody scene. The moment Yggdrasil came into contact with Funbaba, it turned into energy from the spearhead and integrated into Funbaba's body bit by bit. After Funbaba accepted Yggdrasil, it seemed to have strengthened a lot, and its speed became faster. Stop. Suddenly, Wuming made Funbaba stop. The reason why Wuming suddenly stopped was that Wuming smelled blood, and it was the blood of a demonic beast. The blood of a demonic beast was not the same as human blood, so it had a different smell from human blood. Wuming could naturally smell it in an instant. As for Funbaba, whose sense of smell was more sensitive than Wuming's, it had already smelled the scent of a demonic beast, but they were all dead, so Funbaba did not report it to Wuming. Wuming closed his eyes and spread out his mental strength. In an instant, the nearby scene appeared in his mind. On the side of Wuming, a large number of trees had collapsed and were destroyed. One after another, demonic beast corpses were lying among the destroyed trees. A large amount of purple blood stained the ground and the destroyed trees. Not only that, but even the surrounding intact woods also had demonic beast corpses. And in the center of the collapsed area, a huge red demonic beast was lying there, its head separated from its body. Most of the purple blood in this area was actually provided by this huge demonic beast. Demonic Beast Commander. Wuming frowned. The size of an ordinary demonic beast could not reach that level. Only a demonic beast commander could explain this. Judging from the death of the demonic beast commander, Gadotsi and the others must have won. Chapter 991. Gadotzi and the others had most likely returned to Eric Metropolis, but he didn't know how many casualties there were. However, Wuming couldn't go to Eric Metropolis right now. Wait for me here. Wuming exhorted and leaped into the air above the forest, heading towards the battlefield. Funbaba, who nodded to indicate understood, found a relatively large rock, climbed up, and rested. In the blink of an eye, Wuming arrived at the battlefield. Wuming frowned when he sensed the demonic beast commander through his mental power. It was because Wuming found a trace of abnormality in the wound of the demonic beast commander. It was because of this abnormality that Wuming didn't choose to go to Eric Metropolis directly. Wuming didn't care about the other demonic beasts and went straight to the corpse of the demonic beast commander. After inspecting the monster's corpse, Silent Cry found that there was a trace of death aura around the wound on its head. This aura was very similar to the aura of the underworld. Wuming, who had just left the underworld, wouldn't be mistaken. Immediately, Wuming made a judgment. This demonic beast commander was beheaded with a single slash. And to be able to behead it with a single slash and have a trace of death aura in the wound, only that guy could do it. The old man of the mountain, Hassan Sabah. Although there were many Hassans, the one Wuming was referring to was none other than the first Hassan, who was qualified to be an assassin. Wuming was the one who took a slash from that guy. It was normal for him to be able to easily recognize that the slash came from the first Hassan. No, it should be said that no matter who was slashed by the first Hassan, they would remember it. Since he's already here, I can finally relax. Although he was exaggerating the first Hassan was no ordinary person. In terms of assassination, Wuming did not dare to underestimate him. With the addition of Merlin, Gilgamesh, Zhuge Kongming, and Chaldea's Roman, these four think tanks, Wuming didn't have to worry as much. Let's go straight to Edu. Since Gadotzi and the rest were not here, Wuming did not need to continue using Funbaba. After Wuming finished speaking, he opened a teleportation gate and walked in. At the same time, a huge portal suddenly appeared under Funbaba, who was resting on a rock. Caught off guard, Funbaba fell into it. Woo woo woo. The portal suddenly closed, and Funbaba's frightened cry echoed in the forest. Near Eric Metropolis, in the Feathered Serpent Temple. Two portals, one big and one small, opened. Wuming walked out of the small portal, while Funbaba fell out of the horizontal portal. Dong! Funbaba fell to the ground with a loud bang. The citizens of Eric Metropolis thought it was an earthquake. Woo woo woo! Funbaba lay on the ground and cried out. Its head rubbed against Wuming as if it was in pain. However, others did not understand Funbaba, but Wuming did. Funbaba was not hurt at all. It was just frightened and acted spoiled to Wuming. Okay, I apologize. I'm sorry, Funbaba. Wuming didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he stroked Funbaba's head and apologized in a funny tone. However, it was really useful. Funbaba immediately stood up, giving people the feeling that it had completely recovered. Whoa! Isn't this Lord Hyunryong? At this time, the leopard man suddenly appeared from a haystack and looked at Wuming and Funbaba with a silly expression. Wuming was not surprised that the leopard man came to greet him. Funbaba's fall from the portal to the ground made a lot of noise. As a leopard man who has an intuition beyond that of a beast, it is impossible for him not to discover it. In addition, the leopard man is lively and active. It must be her who came to greet Wuming and Funbaba. Leopard man, is Tachika Fujimaru still here? Without talking nonsense with the leopard man, Wuming asked concisely. She has already left, she went east. The leopard man pointed to the east, and there was a trace of seriousness in his seemingly silly eyes. It seems that the leopard man's intuition also detected the danger. Where is Quizzard? Wuming didn't believe that Quizzard couldn't detect the movement caused by Tiamat. Quizzard Koyatl just left, she went to find Tachika Fujimaru. A familiar light voice came from the other side of Wuming. Wuming turned his head and saw that it was indeed Anna. But the difference is that Anna seems to have something on her hand this time. Her body is wrapped with something similar to a bandage. Not only that, but Anna's hood is not worn. Cooker is worried about Tachika Fujimaru, so he rushed over to help. Ignoring the leopard man, Wuming walked to Anna. Anna, are you okay? Faced with Wuming's concern, Anna shook her head. I accidentally suffered a minor injury when dealing with Uxie Mughar, and I have almost recovered. Uxie Mughar. It's probably the name of the magical beast commander who was beheaded. And the reason why Anna stayed here is probably to recuperate. Then, Anna continued to speak. Merlin asked me to wait for you here. He said it's very urgent and he hopes you can make a judgment based on this. Anna said while taking out a clay tablet from under her cloak. So that's how it is. Not only is she recuperating, but she also works as a messenger. Wuming took it and found that the clay tablet was empty. Not only that, but it was also covered with a powerful illusion. If you forcibly look at it, you will fall into an illusion. Merlin, this guy. Wuming was a little speechless. This is simply superfluous. Merlin always likes to work on such meaningless things. A few lune runes were inputted into the clay tablet by Wuming as if entering a password. The illusion suddenly disappeared, and the clay tablet was still empty. But then, some words directly appeared in Wuming's mind, and Wuming also subconsciously closed his eyes. In the next second, the clay tablet in Wuming's hand directly turned into yellow soil and scattered. Anna didn't say anything and quietly waited for Wuming to digest it. On the other hand, the leopard man and Funbaba foolishly mixed together. In an instant, Wuming opened his eyes. Let's go back to Uruk. This was Wuming's judgment. Anna nodded silently. In any case, Merlin told her to listen to Wuming's words. Although Anna didn't want to listen to Merlin, after all, Wuming was a reliable person, so Anna could only make do with it. Hearing Wuming's words, Funbaba also kicked the leopard man away and ran to Wuming's side, fully showing that she was on call. Good. Then I will also go to Uruk. The leopard man put his hands on his hips, showing an inexplicable sense of pride. Wuming looked at the leopard man with disdain, but Wuming still decided to bring the leopard man. In any case, she was still a goddess. Even if she wasn't as good as Quizzard and Ishtar, she would still play a role, right? However, at this moment, Wuming suddenly noticed that a large amount of magic that made Wuming feel disgusted was moving toward Eric Metropolis. Wuming had a bad feeling. Chapter 992. Quizzard's shrine wasn't in Eric Metropolis, but next to Eric Metropolis. Wuming decided to go to Eric Metropolis to take a look. After all, the magic power made Wuming feel uneasy. If Wuming, the leopard man, and Anna left just like that, the citizens of Eric Metropolis might be in danger. Wuming turned to look at the leopard man, who had the sharpest senses. At this moment, the leopard man narrowed his eyes and looked in the direction of Eric Metropolis. It seemed that the leopard man had also noticed the disgusting magic power. Let's go to Eric Metropolis first. Eric Metropolis. The citizens of Eric Metropolis were living their lives day after day. Although they were living in fear for a short period of time because of Quizzard, Eric Metropolis had returned to its previous daily life because of Wuming pulling the feathered serpent god into his group. As the saying goes, those who rely on the mountain live off the mountain, and those who rely on the river live off the water. After all, there were changes in the surroundings of Eric Metropolis. With the consent of Quizzard, the people would enter the jungle from time to time to collect some items for their daily life. After all, this jungle was moved by Quizzard based on the jungle in South America. There were plenty of resources, whether it was water, fruit trees, or herbs, they were all abundant. However, because the trees were full of water, they weren't suitable for firewood. But the former was enough for Eric Metropolis. In addition, the jungle would drive away the magic beasts, and the leopard man and his subordinates would occasionally help to collect. The citizens of Eric Metropolis were living a good life. As usual, the citizens of Eric Metropolis returned to Eric Metropolis after collecting the resources from the jungle. But the difference was that when they returned, someone greeted them at the entrance of the city. "Thank you for your hard work, everyone. Let's take a rest here." The person who spoke was a seemingly noble woman who was dressed elegantly and wore a veil. Even with the veil covering her face, the woman's beauty was obvious. However, no one was captivated by the woman because her status made them subconsciously respect her. "Lady Siduri, thank you for waiting for us here." A person who seemed to be a leader replied to Siduri with incomparable respect. This woman was Siduri, who had rushed over from Uruk with Gadotsi and the others. For some reason, Siduri was left behind. When she heard that the people who went out were about to return, Siduri volunteered to wait at the entrance of the city. Siduri didn't know what she should do. Because of Hyunryong's identity as the chief priest, the citizens of Eric Metropolis respected her very much. They didn't let her do any dirty work. More importantly, the living habits of Eric Metropolis had changed because of the jungle. Siduri, who didn't know about this at all, couldn't force herself to do any work. She might even be more of a hindrance. That was why Siduri was waiting at the entrance of the city to welcome the people who returned. She could only play a role in this aspect for now. The people sat down in the open space to rest for a while, and Siduri looked at the resources that the people had collected. "It seems like we didn't get much this time." Even though Siduri hadn't seen what the previous harvests were like, Siduri could tell at a glance that they didn't get much this time. After all, the amount this time was pitiful. The people only had a few jars of water and some fruits with them. That was all. The resources around here are almost all collected. Lord Leopard Man and the others lost some of their men to fight the monsters. There are many things that we can't collect by ourselves. Although they didn't get much, the leader's face was full of gratitude and guilt. Not only the leader, but the others were also the same. They were not uncivilized people. They were protected by the forest and the gods, and they were able to obtain resources that they had never seen before. The most important thing was that they were able to survive in this land that was filled with magical beasts. Just this last point alone was enough to satisfy them. That was why they were so grateful. As for the guilt, it was because many of the orcs under Leopard Man died in the battle with the monsters. After all, they were fighting the monsters for Eric Metropolis, so it was natural for them to feel guilty. Alright, it's all in the past. Organize the resources and go back to see your families. Yes. Lord Siduri. Siduri was like an angel. The fatigue of the people who went out to collect resources was instantly cleared away. However, at this moment, a clacking sound suddenly came from the dense forest behind them. Everyone turned their heads to look. They really couldn't imagine what could make such a strange sound. It couldn't be a monster or an animal because such a sound couldn't be made by living creatures. The trees in the jungle began to shake, and the bushes rustled. A brave citizen of Eric Metropolis walked over with a knife in his hand. He was about to check it out when he arrived in front of the bushes. But in the next second, a pitch-black cone-like object suddenly pierced the man's chest. In an instant, the man's chest was pierced, and blood spurted out. Then, the thing that pierced the man's chest walked out. Everyone present was shocked. What kind of strange thing was this? A pitch-black creature with arthropods appeared in front of them. Its head did not have any facial features, only a slanted mouth. A large red snake head dangled out of its mouth in an extremely disgusting manner. Its mouth full of neat white teeth did not make people feel at ease, and together with its pitch-black body, it made people feel extremely disgusted. The humanoid body under its head was rather weak and delicate, and its legs had degenerated into two thin lines. It looked like it had completely lost the ability to walk. On the other hand, the monster had 4 arms that resembled appendages. 3 of the 4 arthropods with sharp ends were scattered in 3 directions as support for the weak body. The 4th arthropod held the man whose chest was pierced. Blood flowed all over the ground in the blink of an eye. The people who were struggling before were basically motionless now. ZSYWSNRLDSTZSCRN, some words that people couldn't understand came out from the mouth of this strange thing that they had never seen before. Everyone who heard it felt uncomfortable. Coupled with the appearance of this unknown thing, it was a complete visual pollution. There was no doubt that the demonic beasts were wreaking havoc on this land. Although the people of Aeladu were protected, it was precisely because of this that they had nowhere to vent their frustrations unless they went to the battlefield. Their nerves were now extremely sensitive and tense. And now, their tense nerves seemed to have been cut by this visual pollution. Many people felt despair, fear, and terror in their hearts. And in the next second, this fear intensified. Chapter 993. The corpse of the impaled citizen slid off the forelimb of the unknown creature. However, in the next second, a monster that looked exactly like the unknown creature broke out of the cocoon and absorbed the corpse along the way. What is this? The scene before them made many feel despair towards this monster that was full of mental corruption. Out of fear, the weapons in their hands fell to the ground. Siduri looked uneasy. It was too late to retreat and seek help from the Quetzalcoatl god and the leopard man. Moreover, it was not just these 2 creatures. More and more unknown creatures walked out of the dense forest in front of them. There were hundreds of them. Now, everyone understood where the clacking sound came from. It was the footsteps of these unknown creatures. Everyone was stunned by the scene before them. The unknown creatures did not move. They just looked at them like a cat looking at a mouse. "We're done for, run." It was unknown who said this, but surprisingly, this sentence caused everyone to react and run towards the city behind them. The dark unknown creatures moved as well. They were like cats that saw the mouse moving and were ready to hunt it down. Everyone, hurry to the Quetzalcoatl god's temple. Siduri did not move. Instead, she shouted loudly. She told everyone to stay calm when they lost their cool. Then, Siduri rushed towards the monsters. "At least we have to buy some time." There was one thing that Siduri knew very well. There was no time to escape. Against so many dark monsters, the Quizzard god and the leopard man would not be able to save them. If that's the case, let me buy some time. Even if it's just for a second. This was Siduri's thought. In this situation where the chances of survival were extremely low, Siduri hoped that she could be the cornerstone to buy some time for others to live. ZZLWDSJDL, the monsters spoke in a language that the humans could not understand. They split into 2 groups. Some of them surrounded Siduri, the weak human who had rushed over, while the others chased after the people who were running away. NWSMBTZ. NWSMBTZ. The monsters surrounded Siduri, as if they were questioning her why she did not run away. They kept repeating the same sentence. Siduri could not understand the language of these monsters. She could only suppress her trembling body, clasped her hands in front of her chest, closed her eyes and prayed. Lord Hyunryong, KLS. JTBCWMDTL. KLS. JTBCWMDTL. The monsters raised their sharp forelimbs, as if they were performing some kind of ritual, and collectively stabbed their forelimbs at Siduri. However, the pain did not reach Siduri's body. Instead, the sound of the weapon piercing into the flesh reached Siduri's ears. Puchi. Puchi. Poochie, Siduri boldly opened her eyes. The pitch-black monsters around her were all paralyzed on the ground. There were weapons pierced through their bodies. Purple blood flowed out from the bodies of these dead monsters. King Gilgamesh. This scene was very similar to Gilgamesh's style. After all, in Siduri's memory, only Gilgamesh, who had the Gate of Babylon, could do this. Unfortunately, Gil did not come. A familiar voice entered Siduri's ears. Siduri could not help but raise her head, and then she saw Wuming attached to the air. Lord Hyunryong. Wuming waved his hand, and the weapons that killed the pitch-black monsters all flew into the illusory grids that appeared one after another behind Wuming, and the bodies of the dead monsters also turned into dust and dissipated. Siduri finally understood that those weapons were released from the grids behind Wuming. This was the same method as Gilgamesh. As expected of a master and disciple. Siduri thought so. That's right. Lord Hyunryong, there are still some monsters heading towards Eric Metropolis. Siduri immediately reacted and looked at Wuming pleadingly. Don't worry, Funbaba, Leopard Man, and Anna are all in the city. These things won't cause any trouble. Just Funbaba alone was able to annihilate these unknown monsters without any casualties. Their physical strength wasn't that high, and they had no idea what they were. Wuming jumped down from the air and grabbed a handful of dust that disappeared from the monsters in his hand. This is God's clay. Enkidu's body was made of God's clay, so there was no reason why Wuming could not recognize God's clay. God's clay. Siduri could not help but be shocked. Siduri naturally knew that Enkidu was made of God's clay. However, she really did not expect these murderous monsters to be of the same origin as Enkidu. Looks like this is Tiamat's doing. Wuming really could not think of anyone else who could create such monsters, other than Tiamat. Siduri, immediately go into the city and find Funbaba. Ask Funbaba to surround the entire Eric Metropolis with vines to prevent such monsters from appearing again. Also, help me tell Leopard Man and Anna to temporarily stay in Eric Metropolis as a precaution. Siduri was worthy of being Gilgamesh's assistant. After hearing Wuming's task, her trembling body immediately stopped. Yes, Lord Hyunryong, I will go tell them now. Siduri immediately ran towards the city, but just as she moved, Siduri stopped again. Lord Hyunryong, what are you going to do? Siduri was not a fool. Since Wuming asked her to inform Funbaba and the others, it meant that Wuming had something to do and had to leave. Wuming turned to look at Siduri and said concisely, I'm going to Ur City to take a look. Ur City and Eric Metropolis were the only two cities left in the jungle. It did not mean that the people in the other cities in the jungle had died. These people had gathered in Ur City and Eric Metropolis and were protected by Quizzard's reign of terror. It was not until Wuming roped in Quizzard that the two cities returned to normal. Moreover, Ur City and Eric Metropolis were cities not far from the Persian Gulf. If these monsters all landed in the Persian Gulf where Tiamat was, the monsters may have also attacked Ur City. Wuming, who had been to Ur City, directly came to the entrance of Ur City with a portal. Wuming used his telekinesis to fly into the air and overlooked Ur City. It could only be said that as Wuming expected, the dark monsters in the city had begun to hunt humans. Wuming even saw two humans fighting in the encirclement of monsters. Obviously, these monsters were holding a game with simple rules but extremely disgusting. Chapter 994. Letting two people duel and telling them that only one of them could survive. Otherwise, both of them would die. The former's promise and the latter's threat allowed both parties to duel without any qualms. This could be said to be a vivid depiction of the ugliness of human nature. To be honest, Wuming hated this kind of game. There were only two outcomes to this kind of game. Either the victor would survive, or there would be no survivors. Obviously, the game of these monsters was the latter. The victor would also be killed. The winner, who had already killed his opponent before Wu Ming arrived, sat on the ground, paralyzed. After he recovered, he stood up and looked at the monsters around him with excitement. At this moment, he felt the joy of being able to live in his heart. However, the monsters around him surrounded him and raised their forelimbs, ready to kill the winner. Why? I won. I won. I listened to you and killed him. Ah! The victor let out a voice that fell from the peak of hope into the valley of despair. His face was crumbling. Obviously, these monsters let two people duel for the sake of pleasure. They would not let anyone go. It had to be said that this was very suitable for the monsters. Only monsters could have such twisted pleasure that it made people want to vomit. The meaningless killing instantly made Wu Ming furious. With a furious expression, Wu Ming waved his hand. Countless chains extended from Wu Ming's sleeves. The sharp chains flew towards the monsters in Wu Ming's sight. Poochie, 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 Poochie. In an instant, the sound of weapons piercing through flesh could be heard. All the monsters in Silent Cry's line of sight were pierced through by the heavenly lock, which was the weak point of most creatures. These monsters turned into ashes and dissipated. Sir! Qianriyong. Seeing that Wu Ming had saved his life, the winner immediately knelt down and thanked Wu Ming. Not only him, many people in UR City who were about to be killed were also saved by Wu Ming. They all knelt on the ground, praying and thanking Wu Ming sincerely. However, Wu Ming was not in a good mood at the moment. When he flew over the head of the winner, Wu Ming used magic power to transmit a message to him. You will live the rest of your life in guilt and atonement until you die. These curse-like words lingered in the ears of the victor, causing him to tremble with fear. The winner suddenly raised his head, but Wu Ming had already disappeared. Only the winner was left sitting in the same place with a look of horror and guilt. In the shadows of UR City, Wu Ming strolled over. Wu Ming did not blame the winner for killing his opponent in order to survive. After all, any smart person would know that there was nothing he could do about it. But even though there was nothing he could do about it, Wu Ming's curse-like words to the winner was the price he deserved. Also, Wu Ming didn't come for a stroll in the shadows because he was annoyed. He came to kill the monsters that were hidden. As for how to find these monsters, it was not difficult for Wu Ming to release his mental power to cover the entire UR City. The monsters had a unique magic power that allowed Wu Ming to find them easily. A few monsters that were lucky enough to escape Wu Ming's sight and were not killed by the heaven lock charged out from the shadows, raising their two sharp forelimbs to stab at Wu Ming. But in the next second, the heaven lock that appeared from the golden ripples around Wu Ming pierced through their bodies from top to bottom. A few monsters turned into ashes. One of the monsters that was not completely dead struggled and tried to extend its forelimbs to Wu Ming, and to Wu Ming's surprise, it said, "You are also the child of your mother, why are you helping humans?" But in the next second, it turned into ashes and disappeared with the wind. The child of my mother. Wu Ming frowned. That's right, Wu Ming could understand the words of these monsters. He could understand the words that sounded like the whispers of the ancient gods. That was why Wu Ming was surprised. And the words of the monster just now reminded Wu Ming of the first magical beast commander he met, Elden. At that time, he also said that Wu Ming was the child of Tiamat. However, Wu Ming was sure that he had nothing to do with Tiamat. It's probably because the later generations fabricated that Qianriyong and Tiamat are related. Wu Ming recalled what Roman had said when he introduced Qianriyong to Gadotzi. And Wu Ming had seen gods bound by myths before. The gods of the God Slayer world were the best example. It was probably because the mysterious Hyunryong was believed by the later generations to be the son of Tiamat that Wuming's identity as Hyunryong was believed to be Tiamat's son by the magical beasts. Boring. Wuming could only give this sentence. Who would want to be brothers with magical beasts? Moreover, these monsters might also be Tiamat's children. Coupled with the game of the monsters just now, Wuming felt disgusted at the thought of being brothers with these monsters. Wuming used his open mental power to explore Ur City. After confirming that all these monsters were killed, Wuming withdrew his mental power and used the connection between Wuming and Yggdrasil to inform Funbaba to come to Ur City after building the protective shield of Eric Metropolis. Then, Wuming opened the portal and walked directly in. At the gate of the Hyunryong shrine outside Uruk, black-purple ripples appeared, and Wuming walked out. I haven't been here for a long time. Looking at the gate of the shrine, Wuming sighed. But now was not the time to sigh. Wuming suddenly released his mental power and instantly enveloped the whole place. Just as Wuming expected, there were indeed sporadic monsters appearing in Uruk. Not only that, but there were also a few ugly magical beasts with wings that Wuming had never seen before. They were probably the winged mermaid Kururu. Although the number of Kururu and monsters was small, without a servant, they were no match for these two creatures that they had never seen before. And the monsters also had the ability to turn the people they killed into monsters. If they were given enough time, perhaps the whole Uruk would fall. I don't know how Baby and Gadotsi are doing. There were still a lot of magical beasts on Baby's side. Leonidas and the others couldn't spare any time. Since Gadotsi and the others weren't in the city, there was no doubt that they must have met up with Ishtar near the Persian Gulf. I have to hurry up. As for what time to hurry up, naturally, it was the time to release the backup. Chapter 995. Wuming retracted his mental strength and walked straight into the temple without a door. He came to the Hyunryong statue. The Hyunryong temple was indeed abandoned. This was an undeniable fact. However, when Wuming returned to the Uruk last time, he did something to the temple just in case. Wuming's spiritual base left a barrier in the temple statue that was comparable to a precious artifact. No, it should be called a precious artifact barrier in the god's generation. Wuming floated up and pressed one hand on the head of the Hyunryong statue while chanting. The gods will eventually retreat, and the mythological era will inevitably come to an end. An ethereal voice that contained magic came from Wuming's mouth. Along with these words that were filled with magic, the Hyunryong statue emitted light like a piece of shining jade. Those who have been enlightened need not be guided. Only the protection of the end, like a firefly burning, the light of the unpolished jade turned into specks of fireflies and dispersed into the air. My God, restore, bless the world with this body. In an instant, the Hyunryong statue was completely shattered. The shattered statue turned into specks of light, and along with the powerful magic that was released when it was shattered, they dispersed in all directions. They passed through the temple's walls and floated into the air. If someone took a closer look, they would realize that these specks of light that contained a powerful magic that passed through the temple floated above the Uruk. This was indeed the case. In the next second, a light film suddenly appeared above the Uruk and enveloped the entire Uruk in the form of a protective shield. The moment the Uruk was enveloped by the light film, a large number of specks of light scattered everywhere in the Uruk like phosphor powder. The monsters and Kururu in the light film all exploded and died the moment they came into contact with the phosphor powder. However, the humans were not affected at all. Roar! A dragon's roar came from the sky, and the shadow of a huge dragon appeared on the light film. It was Wuming's dragon-shaped shadow. It's Hyunryong Sama. Hyunryong Sama has blessed us. Hyunryong Sama. Thank you, Hyunryong Sama. For a moment, the Uruk citizens knelt on the ground and prayed to the shadow on the light film in the sky. In the central tower of the Uruk, Gilgamesh, who saw this scene, was relieved. "Well done. As expected of you, Hyunryong," Gilgamesh praised Wuming without hesitation. As for Wuming's seat, he used a teleport portal next to King's seat. However, Wuming did not have the slightest bit of pride. Instead, he shook his head. "I prepared it just in case. I hope that I will never have to use it." After all, if he did not use it, it meant that the Uruk was fine. If he used it, it meant that the Uruk was threatened. Wuming hoped that the latter would not come. However, things did not go as he wished. Wuming had no choice but to use the noble phantasm. At that moment, Gilgamesh no longer commented on this matter. Instead, he changed the topic. "What do you think about the awakened Tiamat?" He put aside the clay tablet in his hand. There was no need to deal with government affairs now. Then, Gilgamesh pointed to the seat on the left and motioned for Wuming to sit down. "I have a trump card to deal with Tiamat, but I still need some time," Wuming sat down and said. "The northern wall is still under attack from the demonic beasts. General Leonidas and the military counselor can't get away for a while. Otherwise, it would be best to let the military counselor stall for time. Zhuge Kongming was famous for his defense. It would be foolproof to let him make a plan to stall for time. However, Chaldea is also a good candidate. You can discuss with them. This king can only be used to command the soldiers to repair Nabistin's tooth." Gilgamesh, who had sealed most of his noble phantasms when he became the Sage King, did not have much combat power. The strength of the old Gilgamesh and the young Gilgamesh were worlds apart. However, in terms of non-combat, Gilgamesh did a good job. For example, he created Nabistin's tooth. Because of Zhuge Kongming, the incomplete Nabistin's tooth was successfully developed 3 months ago. It was installed in the southwest of Uruk as a defensive device. However, what was interesting was that Nabistin's tooth was basically useless. The monsters rode on the winged Kururu and easily crossed Nabistin's tooth. Although Ishtar and Gadotzi were there to stop them, some of them still arrived in Uruk alone. If Wuming did not use the one-time noble phantasm sealed in the Hyunryong statue to protect the Uruk, Gilgamesh would have to deal with those demonic beasts himself. Speaking of which, what are those monsters? Their bodies are made of God's clay. Gilgamesh's pupils shrank when he heard Wuming's words. Obviously, Gilgamesh had no idea what they were. Roman from Chaldea should know what they are, but the people from Chaldea and Ishtar are fighting the monsters and the Kururu in the southwest Persian Gulf. Even Merlin is there. However, this king doesn't have the means to contact them, so he can't contact them at the moment. Gilgamesh had another layer of meaning. He did not know much about the current situation, so he could not say much. However, Tiamat's awakening is beyond this king's expectation. Gilgamesh used his clairvoyance to see the future, but Gilgamesh saw those things in his dreams. After he sealed those things on the Destiny Tablet, Gilgamesh forgot what he saw. This was normal for humans. When a person woke up, he could only remember the dream for a short time. Once he was completely awake, the dream would be forgotten. The most reliable way was to record it on the spot. However, since he recorded it on the Destiny Tablet when he was half awake, it was reasonable for Gilgamesh to forget where the tablet was. Due to the tense situation, the tablet was not found at all. However, it did not matter if it was not found. After all, the enemy now was Tiamat. The Holy Grail is not with Gorgon either. It is most likely with Kingu or Tiamat. Wuming did not see any trace of the Holy Grail when he killed Gorgon. In addition, Kingu easily abandoned Gorgon. It was obvious that the Holy Grail was not with Gorgon. Kingu. Ha ha ha, you mean the impostor who is using Enkidu's body? That is a logical name. The reason Gilgamesh laughed was simple. Gilgamesh obviously did not think that the person was Tiamat's son, Kingu. Chapter 996. If it was an ancient god like Kingu, there was no need for him to take over Enkidu's body. This would lower his own status, so that Kingu must be an impostor as well. But Kingu was Tiamat's son, which was quite fitting for the impostor Enkidu. Speaking of which, Merlin told me something through the stone tablet. Oh, Gilgamesh showed an interested expression. It was obvious that Merlin was also hiding something from Gilgamesh. Merlin cast an illusion on Tiamat when he was in the Utopia, and kept Tiamat in a state of deep sleep, which led to Gorgon's appearance. Wuming told Gilgamesh about the letter Merlin wrote that he obtained from Anna. Kingu used the Holy Grail to connect Tiamat's 100-beast embryo authority to Gorgon's body, so that Gorgon could use the 100-beast embryo authority that was still in Tiamat's body, and through Gorgon's death, he could affect Tiamat and cause her to wake up from the illusion. For the record, this was something that Merlin discovered later. When Wuming used force to injure Tiamat's transformed Gorgon and caused Gorgon to return to normal, Tiamat woke up for a short while, but she immediately fell into a deep sleep. But even though it was only for a short while, it still caused serious injuries to Merlin. But because Tiamat did not wake up, Merlin did not suffer any fatal injuries. Oh. In other words, Gorgon's exit caused Tiamat to wake up. Gilgamesh did not blame Wuming. After all, Gorgon was an existence that had to be defeated, and Tiamat waking up was just a matter of time. Actually, I had a rough guess. I wanted to keep Gorgon and wait until I had prepared my trump card before attacking Gorgon, but Gorgon's state was really strange. I was afraid that something would happen if I delayed it too long, so I let Gorgon leave. Gilgamesh nodded and did not blame Wuming. In addition to Gorgon's mental state being abnormal, there was another important reason. Gorgon had already fought his way to the north wall, and Gorgon couldn't possibly break through the wall. Furthermore, knowing that the enemy was goddess Tiamat was not without its benefits. At the very least, he knew that defeating goddess Tiamat would save the singularity. By the way, is Siduri still with the feathered serpent god? Gilgamesh suddenly asked. Wuming could not help but look at Gilgamesh. Why would he ask about Siduri at a time like this? This was obviously a personal matter, and it was unlikely that Gilgamesh would ask about it. But Wuming thought of Gilgamesh's clairvoyance. If Wuming did not arrive in time, Siduri would have undoubtedly been killed and assimilated into the monster. Wuming happened to see the monster being born from the body of the killed villager when he arrived, and he had to admit that it was quite disgusting, both psychologically and physically. Gilgamesh probably saw something bad in the future. But it was scary, but not dangerous. Wuming smiled faintly. With Wuming, an existence that did not belong to this world, any fate that was linked to Wuming would deviate from its fixed path. That was certain. Although his expression did not change, Gilgamesh clearly sighed in relief. Familiar with Gilgamesh, he could see that. But before Wuming could show an expression of ridicule, Gilgamesh immediately spoke. The Uruk is protected by this king and your power. You should go and support Chaldea and Ishtar. They are the main fighting force at the moment. Gilgamesh waved his hand, and the seat under Wuming shattered. Without another word, he chased Wuming out. After all, the king also cared about his reputation. How could he let Wuming laugh at him? It's still swift and fierce, Wuming said softly as he walked out of the divine tower. Looking at the canopy that shrouded the entire Uruk, as well as the sporadic magic beasts and monsters that could not enter the canopy, Wuming finally felt relieved. At least the Uruk was safe. Wuming leaped and flew directly into the sky. He penetrated the protective light film and killed the few Kururu and monsters along the way. Then, he flew in the direction of the Persian Gulf. Gilgamesh, who was at the top of the divine tower, looked at Wuming through the open window with his sharp eyes. He picked up the clay tablet at the side again. Being calm in the face of change was also the way of a king. In the direction of the Persian Gulf, Wuming would kill Kururu and monsters whenever he encountered them. Wuming, who had almost unlimited magic power, was not someone these things could stop. Soon, Wuming flew to a position close to the Persian Gulf. However, Wuming frowned. Although it was not obvious, Wuming could see that the sea level was rising. Not only that, but the ground was almost full of the figures of those monsters. They were densely packed, like bees crowded in a hive. Most of the monsters were moving toward the Uruk, and a small number of them scattered in all directions. It seemed that these monsters knew how to kill. But unfortunately, except for Uruk and Erech Metropolis, the people of other cities had already taken refuge in the Uruk half a year ago. It could be said that if it were not for the Quetzalcoatl, the people of Uruk and Erech Metropolis would also have gone to the Uruk. However, it was precisely because the people of these two cities did not go to the Uruk that the burden on the Uruk was reduced, which could be regarded as a pleasant surprise. Even if these monsters did not go to the Uruk, they could only go to Erech Metropolis and Uruk. At the moment, those two cities were protected by Funbaba, Leopard Man, Anna, and the missing Gadotsi and others. In all likelihood, they went to the Quetzalcoatl's territory. Wuming did not have to worry at all. Looking into the distance, Wuming found that the distant sky was covered by dark clouds. For some reason, he could not see the situation on the sea clearly. He could only see some monsters floating on the sea. Wuming saw them very clearly, but these monsters were motionless as if they were in an incubator. Sure enough, they climbed up from the sea. These monsters were related to Tiamat, and Tiamat was in the Persian Gulf, so it was not surprising that these monsters climbed up from the Persian Gulf. Compared to the monsters on the ground and in the sea, the number of winged mermaids in the sky was not many. No, it was not that there were not many, but these magical beasts had become breeding grounds for the monsters. One after another, Kururu flew to the ground, allowing the monsters to kill them. Then, a new monster was born from the body of the killed Kururu. Chapter 997. Perhaps it was because they had absorbed Kururu, these monsters were taller than the other monsters that came ashore from the sea. Their bodies were bigger too. Their originally shriveled and weak bodies had become slightly bulkier. They looked a little stronger. However, Wuming wasn't here to see the demons and monsters. No matter how powerful these monsters were, as long as the final enemy, Tiamat, was defeated, these things would naturally fall apart without a fight. Wuming was there to discuss with Gadotsi and the others. Let's go to Erech Metropolis and Ur City. In fact, Wuming could sense Ishtar's general location through the contract between him and Ishtar. That location was in the direction of the dense forest. Moreover, Wuming did not see Gadotsi all the way from Uruk. The probability of her being killed by these monsters was too low. It could be said that it was almost zero. Putting Matthew aside, Quizzard and Ishtar, the two Venus goddesses, were also there. Moreover, the first Hassan might be hiding in the dark to follow Gadotsi and the others. In short, Gadotsi would definitely be fine. In this way, Wuming would think that Gadotsi and the others had gone to the dense forest. After killing all the Kururu that surrounded them, Wuming did not intend to kill the monsters on the ground. In the entire Mesopotamia, other than the guards at the north wall, there were only humans in the dense forest of Uruk and the Quetzalcoatl. Wuming did not encounter Gadotsi and the others along the way, which meant that they had gone to the dense forest. The Uruk had Wuming's one-time use relic as insurance. The north wall was too far away from here. Gadotsi and the others were in the dense forest. All three places with humans were safe. Wuming did not need to kill these monsters that would continue to be produced. It was still the same statement: after defeating the goddess Tiamat, all problems would be solved. Ur City and Erech Metropolis were not far from the Persian Gulf. Not only Wuming, but the monsters also soon arrived at these two places. Outside Ur City, Funbaba did not have time to build a vine barrier as the monsters came one after another not long after Funbaba arrived. Hence, Ur City was still the same as before, with only the dense forest around it as a natural defense. However, the dense forest was a natural hiding place for these monsters. It could be said that the dense forest did not help. However, it was fortunate that Finbabar was not fighting alone. A figure was flying in the sky. Several flashes of light flashed from the huge bow-shaped weapon of the figure from time to time. Countless monsters were blown away, and the energy generated from the explosions was enough to shatter these monsters. On the ground, a figure was wreaking havoc among the monsters. The explosions did not affect or damage this figure at all. Instead, every monster that came into contact with this figure would be split in half. This was the effect of the strangle skill. These two figures were Ishtar and Quetzalcoatl, the two goddesses of Venus. On the other hand, Gadotsi and Matthew gathered the people in Ur City and gathered them in a house that occupied a relatively large area. "Quick, everyone, come here." Funbaba took the opportunity to summon vines outside the house to surround it. Considering that the limbs of the monsters were quite sharp, Funbaba's vine barrier, whether it was in Erech Metropolis or here, was thicker and could automatically regenerate. It did seem powerful and effective, but it also meant that Funbaba had to spend a lot more mana, energy, and time to use it. And because the monsters were approaching, Gadotsi and Matthew kept gathering the people here. They wanted to let the people gather in one house first. After all, building a vine barrier around this big house was much easier than building one around the entire Ur City. Fortunately, Ishtar and Quizard were helping to deal with the monsters, so Funbaba had time to build the vine barrier. But probably because the humans discovered signal was sent to the group, the number of monsters increased, and Ishtar and Quizard gradually found it difficult to deal with them. Unable to focus on Funbaba, Gadotsi, and the people behind them, the two of them had to concentrate on fighting the monsters. And because of this, the two cunning people accidentally exposed a few of the monsters, and allowed them to rush to the house that had not yet been fully built. KLS. 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 The monsters rushed toward Gadotsi with an incomprehensible voice. Matthew dashed behind Gadotsi. "Senpai, please be careful." Matthew blocked the monster and looked at Gadotsi worriedly. Gadotsi did not care about his words of comfort because she saw a few more monsters running to the front of the house. If the monsters were to enter, it would be terrible. Matthew. However, Matthew was already having a hard time dealing with one monster, so he did not have time to deal with the other monsters. "Funbaba, please." Gadotsi had no choice but to ask Funbaba for help. However, Funbaba was minding his own business and ignored Gadotsi. At this moment, a figure rushed out of the house. It was the winner from before. Ah! He held a wooden stick in his hand and rushed to the monster, under the surprised gazes of the other residents. It seemed that he wanted to stop it. Even if the price was death. "Be careful." Gadotsi could not help but shout. However, in the next second, the wooden stick of the winner was cut off by the monster, and its blade-like forelimbs slashed across the winner. However, under the shocked expressions of everyone, including Ishtar and Quizard, the monster turned its head in puzzlement. In the next second, the golden chain passed through the monster's head, and the monster turned into ashes. Walalal dash. Poochie, Poochie, Poochie. The monsters that crossed the line of defense of the two Venus goddesses were all killed by the chains that penetrated their brains and turned into ashes. The one Matthew dealt with was no exception. Could it be Kingu? Matthew immediately guarded Gadotsi. Kingu had just reported his identity near the Persian Gulf, and Kingu's fighting style was very similar to this scene. It was inevitable that Matthew would be mistaken. Clang! The broken wooden stick fell to the ground, and the smooth cut meant that the monster's forelimbs were sharper than expected. Sien. Lord Hyunryong, the winner, slumped to the ground as if he had just survived a disaster. He muttered with excitement and gratitude. In the next second, Wuming descended from the sky and landed in front of the winner. Chapter 998. That's right, the attack just now wasn't Kingu, but Wuming's. Seeing Wuming's arrival, Ishtar and Quizzard were relieved and no longer paid attention to them. Instead, they focused on dealing with the monsters. Even if there was something missing, Wuming would cover it up, so they didn't have to worry about it at all. On the other side, the winner touched his body with lingering fear. He clearly remembered that the monster just split him open. As expected of Hyunryong, the use of space magic is superb. The device on Gadotsi's wrist issued Roman's exclamation. Space magic. Gadotsi was puzzled. Senpai, it's actually like this. After all, Matthew was a servant. He saw the scene that just happened, so he simply explained it to Gadotsi. When Ramu's attack slashed down, Matthew saw a very thin space crack appeared in front of the winner. The size was just enough to accommodate Ramu's attack. When Ramu passed by the winner, it actually entered another space, so the winner naturally had nothing to do with it. So that's how it is, I didn't see it. Sure enough, Assassin is very reliable. Gadotsi smiled foolishly, which made Matthew didn't know how to complain. On Wuming's side, he heard the conversation between Gadotsi and others, but he didn't interrupt Wuming. Indeed, as Roman and Matthew said, Wuming used the so-called space magic, the portal, to help the winner block the attack. Looking at the winner sitting on the ground, Wuming spoke. There are many ways to atone for your sins. Death is just an escape. You won't feel at ease in the underworld. Senpai. Hyunryong Sama. I'm sorry. The winner lowered his head guiltily. You're not only carrying your own life, but also that person's life. This is the life of two people. Live well. He patted the winner on the shoulder, and then left the winner sitting on the ground with a thoughtful look. Wuming walked toward Gadotsi while looking at Funbaba. Funbaba, go and help Ishtar and Quizzard. Woo-woo, Funbaba immediately joined the battlefield. Assassin. Gadotsi waved her hand and ran toward Wuming. But then, Gadotsi showed a dissatisfied look. Why won't Funbaba listen to me? Wuming couldn't help but laugh when he heard Gadotsi's question. In fact, Funbaba didn't make a move because of Wuming's order. Wuming wanted to see how determined the winner was. Although his body was trembling, he had the determination to face death. Since that was the case, carrying the lives of two people was what he should do now. Probably because he saw me coming. Wuming said perfunctorily. Wuming glanced at the crowd and didn't see Merlin. He couldn't help but ask Gadotsi. Where did Merlin go? Could it be that he died because of Goddess Tiamat? Merlin said in the letter that he would be fine, but now that he couldn't see Merlin, Wuming thought that Merlin died. Mr. Merlin went to Eric Metropolis. He said that Ishtar, Quizzard, and Funbaba are here, so he didn't have to worry, so he went to Eric Metropolis alone. Although that was what she said, the worry between Gadotsi's eyebrows wasn't fake. Merlin was injured because of Tiamat before, and Ramu's figure was everywhere in the forest. It would be a lie to say that she wasn't worried. However, Merlin insisted on going. Gadotzi and the others couldn't persuade him, so they could only compromise. Merlin probably had his own thoughts. After all, it wasn't only the Tablet of Destiny that had prophecies. With this thought in mind, Wuming didn't continue the topic. By the way, we can't stay here anymore. We have to move these people to Uruk. Wuming pointed to the citizens who were hiding in the house behind him and didn't dare to come out. Why? Gadotzi and Matthew were puzzled. As long as Finbaba built the vine barrier, the Ramu would no longer be a problem. The sea level in the Persian Gulf is continuing to rise. I'm afraid this place will be submerged. If the citizens continue to stay here, it will undoubtedly be a dead end. Immediately afterward, Wuming looked at the Ramu group that was slaughtered by Finbaba, Ishtar, and Quizzard. Although it was a massacre, the Ramu group was still more difficult to deal with than the demonic beasts. These Ramu are not weak, and they can evolve. The vine barrier can only work for a short period of time. It can't work forever. These monsters were all made of God's clay. It couldn't be that simple. Hyunryong is right. I have already detected that the sea level in the Persian Gulf is rising. I'm afraid it won't be long before the entire southwest region is submerged. We have to move these people. Gadotzi and Matthew nodded. Since Wuming and Roman said so, they believed it. But we don't have a means of transportation, and Quizzard doesn't have many pterodactyls. There's no way to move so many citizens to Uruk. Gadotzi sighed. If Uruk was submerged, then Eric Metropolis would undoubtedly be submerged as well. The combined population of the two cities was already more than 1,000. It was really difficult to deal with. Indeed, whether it's the distance between Uruk and Uruk or the population of the two cities, it's quite unfavorable for this transfer. Roman in Chaldea kept typing on the keyboard, calculating various solutions. However, Leonardo da Vinci suddenly said, "Why don't we just leave it to the Villo?" Roman was stunned. Gadotzi and Matthew were stunned for a moment, then looked at Wuming. Wuming didn't know what to say. Since I'm the one who raised the problem, I'll naturally solve it. I'll use the portal to send all of them to Uruk. You don't have to worry. As expected, Assassin is the most reliable. Gadotzi smiled. Speaking of which, who gave them the name Ramu? Wuming suddenly asked. It's me. Dr. Roman said weakly. After all, Ramu was a mythical existence in Mesopotamia. Wuming, as a Hyunryong, was mysterious. Roman was afraid that this name had something to do with Wuming. However, because in this singularity, only the demon beast Ramu did not appear in the 11 sons of Tiamat, Roman arbitrarily named these monsters Ramu. Don't be nervous, I'm just asking. Although it was just asking, Wuming was still quite concerned. In other words, it was impossible not to be concerned. Chapter 999. Back then, Wuming was called Ramu by Wuming. No matter how stupid he was, he should know that Hyunryong's identity had most likely become one of the 11 sons of Tiamat, which meant that Wuming was also considered Ramu, and these monsters were also called Ramu. It had to be said that having the same name as those monsters made Wuming feel quite disgusted. However, this was just a code name. After all, Wuming was not Ramu. It was just a myth that was tampered with by later generations. In addition, Wuming gave all the divinity that belonged to Hyunryong to Ereshkigal, so Hyunryong identity could be said to be half-crippled. Therefore, Wuming shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. It's always convenient to have a code name. By the way, did you meet Kingu? Do you know where it is now? Just now, the fake Enkidu who claimed to be Kingu ambushed us when we rushed to the Persian Gulf to support Miss Ishtar. However, Miss Quizzard took advantage of the abnormality and defeated the other party. After that, we rushed over because we were worried about the situation in the jungle. In other words, they did not know. However, Wuming speculated that Kingu was most likely still in the Persian Gulf. With the abnormality and injury, as well as the appearance of Tiamat, it was impossible for Kingu to go anywhere else. Then, Wuming spoke to Roman in Chaldea. Roman, send me all the information about the enemy at this singularity. Wuming reached out and tapped on the communicator on Gadotzi's wrist. Although it was a request, when Wuming touched the communicator, Chaldea's data was lost. Hey, hey, hey. Roman's panicked voice was heard. Roman was shocked. Wuming used an unknown method to hack into Chaldea through Gadotzi's terminal and directly copied the information about the seventh singularity from Chaldea's database. What kind of magic can do this? Roman sighed gloomily. There was probably such magic, but Wuming did not know how to do it. Wuming actually asked Kalas to help him obtain information about Chaldea. After all, to Kalas, Chaldea's firewall system was extremely old-fashioned, and it was not a problem to hack into it. Kalas was indeed busy preparing Wuming's trump card, but that did not mean that Kalas was completely useless. Otherwise, Kalas would not have come to this singularity with Wuming. I'll open a portal between Uruk and Eric Metropolis to Uruk. I'll leave the task of guiding the citizens to you. We'll meet again in Uruk. After Wuming finished speaking, he leaped into the sky and released his magic power, disappearing in the blink of an eye. After Wuming left, a black-purple ripple appeared in front of Matthew and Gadotzi. This was probably the portal that connected to Uruk. Perhaps, such a portal had also appeared in Eric Metropolis. Senior, is Senior Villo okay? Matthew was a little worried. However, it was not Gadotzi who answered Matthew. Don't worry. He's a god that even I have a new level of respect for. Besides, he's just going to investigate. He won't directly attack Tiamat. Nothing will happen. The Quetzalcoatl, who ran to Matthew's side, comforted Matthew. Then, she whistled, and a huge grey pterosaur flew in front of Quizzard. You guys go to Eric Metropolis to help guide the citizens. Leave this to me. Quizzard, who was listening to everyone's conversation, asked Finbaba and Ishtar to temporarily block Ramu while she sent Gadotzi and the others to transport. Please, Quizzard. Please, Miss Quizzard. Gadotzi and Matthew asked one by one. Yes, yes, leave it to me. Then, let's meet in Uruk. The Quetzalcoatl waved at Gadotzi and Matthew as if it was an order. The Quetzalcoatl under them suddenly spread its wings and flew toward Eric Metropolis. Then, Quizzard arranged for the citizens of Uruk to enter the portal one by one. Whether it was for survival or for Quizzard's dignity, they had to enter the portal. Because of this, in just a short period of time, the citizens of Ur City had all entered the teleportation portal. Quizzard. Come and help. At this time, Ishtar's exasperated voice was heard. The Ramu could no longer hold them back. Even if Finbaba kept summoning vines to intercept, they still could not stop the Ramu's numbers. Rats could indeed bite an elephant to death, especially one that did not fight. Finbaba and Ishtar were such elephants at this moment. Ishtar had to cherish her magic, so she could only kill the Ramu bit by bit. The task of stopping the Ramu was actually handed over to Finbaba. After all, it was more suitable for the task. Although Finbaba could kill the Ramu, its main task now was to stop the Ramu and allow the citizens of Europe to leave. It had to be said that it was already a good thing that they could hold on until now. The number of Ramu that came to support them was probably in the tens of thousands, and this did not include the dead Ramu. Moreover, one should not forget that the Ramu had always had reinforcements. With Ishtar and Finbaba not fighting, and Ramu continuously providing reinforcements, the number of Ramu could only increase, not decrease. However, now was probably the time to reap the harvest. After all, the citizens of Uruk had all been evacuated. Ishtar, you can go all out now. Funbaba too, the feathered serpent goddess, waved at the human and beast in the sky and on the ground. Then, Quizzard whistled again. A colorful long-haired pterosaur flew over. This was Quizzard's personal mount. When the pterosaur flew over Quizzard's head, Quizzard suddenly jumped and landed on the pterosaur's back. She kept increasing the pterosaur's altitude, as if something was about to reach the ground. Quizzard's method was not wrong. Something was about to reach the ground, and that was the anger that Ishtar and Funbaba had been holding in for so long. Woo woo woo. Accompanied by Funbaba's cry, an earthquake-like tremor spread from Funbaba's feet to the surroundings. The Ramu were all shaken to the ground, and even the buildings in Europe began to collapse and crack. However, this was just the appetizer. Quizzard, who was flying in the sky, had an exceptionally good vision. In her eyes, almost all the Ramu were instantly pierced by the mutated vegetation around them. Some weak vegetation that could not kill the Ramu even left seeds in the Ramu's body. In the next second, the sprouts in the Ramu's body suddenly grew, and directly broke the Ramu's body. Not only that, but the aftermath of the earthquake had also arrived. Countless cracks appeared on the ground, and countless Ramu fell into the cracks as if they had fallen into a bottomless abyss, disappearing without a trace. Chapter 1000. Woo woo woo. Funbaba roared a few more times, and the cracked ground suddenly healed. There were no traces of cracks at all, and even the vegetation on the ground was intact. The buildings in UR City were restored to their original state, and some were even decorated with vines and flowers. It looked like a good place to live. Funbaba was a mythical beast that was even more powerful than the sky bull Gujulan. It could easily change the terrain with just a wave of its hand. Moreover, Funbaba could even restore the changed terrain to its original state. This highlighted how powerful Funbaba was. The Ramu who were at the back of the forest were at a loss. How did the enemy suddenly become so powerful? Wouldn't it consume a lot of magic to change the terrain like this? Wasn't there enough magic? However, Funbaba didn't lack magic at all, and it didn't consume much magic to control the mutation of the plants and the cracking of the earth. These could be said to be its innate ability. It had the powerful ability to change the terrain with just a wave of its hand. Even if the area was so large, it still didn't consume much of its magic. I underestimated Funbaba, Quizzard said thoughtfully. While Quizzard was thinking, the attack on Ramu didn't end. Then, a golden star suddenly shone in the sky. In the next second, the golden star landed on the Ramu who weren't affected by the attack. In an instant, the whole ground shook again, and the light covered everything. Quizzard quickly ordered the pterosaur to close its eyes and turn around. Otherwise, its eyes would be directly blinded by the light. After a moment, when the dazzling light dissipated, what was left was a bare and sunken ground. As for the Ramu, there was no doubt that there wasn't even a trace of it left behind. That guy is too messy. Quizzard couldn't help but frown. Funbaba's attack wouldn't affect its body much, but Ishtar probably couldn't. The attack just now might have consumed all the magic in her body. As expected by Quizzard, Ishtar landed on the ground of UR City. It seemed that she had used up a lot of her magic. In fact, Ishtar wasn't like Funbaba. The attack just now directly used up all the magic in her body. Ishtar was right. Ishtar, are you okay? Quizzard landed on the ground and came before Ishtar. He could not help but reprimand him. You're too reckless. Hyunryong can't replenish your magic now. Hee hee. I accidentally used too much magic. Ishtar laughed. She was obviously acting dumb. However, Ishtar had Wuming's support after all. Even if Wuming's 3 magic crystals were used up and he couldn't replenish Ishtar's magic quickly, with the contract between Ishtar and Wuming, Ishtar could recover quickly. Moreover, don't forget who Ishtar was. She was the extremely capricious mistress of the heavens. Even if releasing such a terrifying attack would lead to insufficient magic, according to Ishtar's character, she had to release it. Ishtar wanted to release the resentment that she had been holding in for a long time. If she were to be timid because of the lack of magic, it would not be like Ishtar. Quizzard also understood Ishtar's temper. In addition, Ishtar and Wuming's contract could indeed help Ishtar recover her magic quickly. In the end, she didn't say anything. In short, Ishtar was not in a dangerous situation at the moment. They could immediately use the portal that Wuming left behind to go to Uruk. It would be very safe in Uruk. Let's go. Let's go to Uruk. Hyunryong's portal is still intact. It did not disappear because of the attack just now. In fact, after Funbaba and Ishtar released the attack, Quizzard had already planned to fly to Eridu with the pterosaur, or directly to Uruk. However, when she landed just now, she found that the portal left behind by Wuming was not affected, which saved her a lot of effort. However, at this time, Funbaba suddenly ran over and was ready to go to Uruk to wait for Wuming. However, Quizzard suddenly found a problem. That was, the portal left by Wuming was not big, and Funbaba was too big, so Funbaba could not enter the portal at all. Quizzard and Ishtar looked at each other, not knowing what to do. They couldn't leave Funbaba alone, not to mention other things, Wuming would definitely be angry. So, let Funbaba run to Uruk. It was a little cruel, woo. Woo woo. Probably seeing the doubts of the two, Funbaba whimpered twice, and then its body emitted light. The light covered Funbaba, and Funbaba's body was gradually shrinking. It turns out that Funbaba can shrink. Ishtar breathed a sigh of relief. However, when Funbaba shrank, Quizzard and Ishtar, who saw the scene in front of them, were not calm. In front of them, a young girl with green eyes and long green hair appeared. On Wuming's side, on the way to the Persian Gulf, Wuming digested the information he got from Chaldea. Wuming really didn't know much about Tiamat, and this was the main reason why Wuming needed information. After confirming that Ur City and Eric Metropolis were safe, Wuming also had time to go to the Persian Gulf to find out what Wuming was most worried about, the relationship between Tiamat and the root black mud. Wuming looked down, and what he saw was black seawater, which was full of the root black mud's aura. This completely proved that Tiamat had the root black mud, and there was no need to investigate further. However, Wuming still had to go and find other information. Moreover, Wuming still had to find Kingu. After all, the Holy Grail that Wuming asked Kingu to keep on his behalf was still missing. There was still a person in it, and he had to find it as soon as possible. As for whether Kingu would give it to him, that was another matter. I don't know how Tachika and the others are doing. One had to know that the area below Wuming was supposed to be land, but it had turned into an ocean. There was no doubt that the sea level was rising. It was just that, the rate of sea level rise is a bit faster than I expected. After all, even if the sea changed into mulberry fields, there was still a process. Who would have thought that after a while, the land near the Persian Gulf would be submerged? Wuming shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He raised his arm. Shaowen, can you try to find Kingu's location? Not to mention that it was Enkidu's body, Enkidu and Kingu were both heavenly locks, so they should be able to sense it. Sure enough, chains appeared on Wuming's arm and pointed in a certain direction. It seemed that Kingu was there. Wuming's magical power erupted again, and with the help of his telekinesis, he flew out. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.